We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to another edition of AV Rant. I'm Tom Andrew, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AV Rant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. And we're a week into Tom owning his 83-inch OLED TV now. I almost messed
filthy
up.
tongue.
Because I was thinking about the size of OLED screen that I have. But no, it's an 83-inch C2 Tom has. So I think we're going to have to hear all about that in our What We Watched section.
We will. We will be hearing about it.
Yes. Will we be hearing about any of the other fun little things? I know there was a little tidbits after we stopped recording last week, and some slight misadventures, things that aren't working quite right.
I think at the end of the last podcast we talked about how I was trying to figure out why it was super dark,
and then why your Roku was now refusing to output 4K and HDR.
Yes. So I did a little more sleuthing on that.
Yeah.
I connected the Roku directly to the TV.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, come on in.
I do want to tease while Tom just deals with his dog there that it was a super complicated high-end solution to that whole 4K issue when it came out. Got to tease that. You'll never guess how incredibly complicated it was why 4K wasn't working.
Listen, you're just going to have to figure out how to step over that cable. You can do it. You are a very big dog. No, he can't do it.
Okay.
He's not doing it. He's just going to lie down over here in this little spot.
That
doesn't have any cables on it.
It's a
can't
visual
even lie
barrier.
all the way down. Oh my god.
Yes.
I love that dog.
Mm-hmm.
That dog he's not smart. I'm going to be honest with you. He's not a problem solver. Let's put it this way. He never would have figured out this Roku thing. So anyways, I plugged the Roku directly into the TV with the 8K fiber optic, high speed, ultra certified, blah, blah, blah cable.
Yeah.
And it worked fine.
Oh.
So I was like, okay, well, look at that. So I plugged it back into everything else, and I was like, well, maybe it just needed to switch that way.
Sure, yeah.
And that was the problem. But then I plugged everything back in, and it was like, nope, we don't like this 4K thing.
What could it be? What could it be?
So I was farting around, and I realized, man, this HDMI cable that's going from the Roku to the receiver, I don't recognize this one. Like, where did this come from? Like, how did I get this HDMI cable? And I know that most people are like, I know where I literally got every single HDMI cable. I do not. HDMI cables just appear in my home theater sometimes because they come with things, and then they just
you have no shortage of them.
Yes, I am not. Yeah, so I went and found another HDMI cable that I knew was ultra certified, and I plugged that in, and it started working. So I was like, oh, I fixed it. But then Rob doesn't know this.
Yes, this is the update. This is what we're all here to hear.
But then when I watched something in HDR, I think I was watching Ahsoka, and when I switched back to like the SDR, which is I think what the menu is, it broke again. And but I just had to turn the 4K off and turn it back on, and it was fine.
Okay.
Because this is how things work. So
smooth as butter.
So I have been watching almost exclusively SDR ever since, except for last night I was watching, and the night before actually, I started a couple of movies, which I know were in HDR because the HDR logo popped up.
Okay, yes.
And when I switched back, it was fine. So maybe it's fixed. I think it's the receiver. Honestly, I think that the receiver is just like, yeah, technically I can do all these things, but
I was a little early to the party.
Yeah.
maybe don't have the most up-to-date HDMI spec, which is the case. It doesn't have the most up-to-date HDMI
so it's an
spec.
X4300. So it is working. As far as I can tell, it's working right now, and everything seems to be fine. But, and it looks great. We've gotten rid of all the super dark scenes. We've got that thing all kind of sorted out.
Yes.
There's still some issues. I think that Rob and I, I'm going to go through all the settings and make sure that at some point. It's not going to be today, but one of these points we're going to go through all those things and make sure I've got everything right. Yeah,
because you were getting some black bars that weren't inky black, which isn't right for an OLED. They should absolutely completely disappear into the bezel.
But it's hard to know if for me at least, the black bars, like when the blackness is definitely like this is the TV going to black, then it's black. But when it's sometimes like I'm thinking that the black bars are actually part of the original signal.
Yes. Yeah.
Then maybe it's like, oh, we're almost black.
No, the black bar should be completely inky black.
So anyways, we're going to have to figure out what's going on with that, because there's still a little bit of that going on. But overall, got everything sort of sorted out. Everybody's been using, everybody's loved it. The only thing that really bothers me is when we're in HDR.
Yes.
And I press volume.
Yeah.
The freaking white text is like...
And I mean, do you need to see the overlay from your AV receiver? Because you can just turn that off in the AV receiver and just not have any on-screen display.
The receiver, I've positioned the receiver in such a way
that you can't see the front panel for the volume
I
readout.
can't see the front panel. I have a very good view of the back of the AV receiver, so I can plug things in and out very easily now, which has really been it's worked out for me.
Yes,
in the
much more convenient.
Talking is hard. So anyways, yes, it's been advantageous. And so that's been going well. So yes, let's talk about what we watched, and then we're gonna talk about listeners and stuff like that. So let's talk about what we watched first. Go ahead, Rob.
Okay, so I had plans in place last week to go see Godzilla by Kong, and I am referring to it as Godzilla by Kong because there is that X in there in the name, even though officially they have said you don't pronounce the X in any way in the title. It's just Godzilla Kong.
That's dumb. I'm not doing that.
I don't like that, and I much
don't
prefer to
put the
think
letter there if you don't want it to be pronounced.
There is that, and I also just prefer to think that Godzilla and Kong are now units of measurement. I mean, we had Godzilla -1, and now we can have a Godzilla by a Kong. Just like a 2x4, it's Godzilla by Kong in my head, so
or maybe
that's how I say it.
It's Godzilla numbers of Kong.
It could be. Could be a multiplication there.
Multiplication thing. It's an X. Could be a multiplication.
But I prefer pronouncing it as by, because I just think that's the funniest way to say that title.
Kong Godzilla times.
Yes.
That's what it is.
Yep.
Go on.
However,
how was it?
I didn't get to go see it. Plans fell through. I didn't manage to see that movie last week, so I was disappointed in that. I really didn't watch anything else at home, except I did rewatch Oppenheimer with my parents and saw it on Ultra HD Blu-ray. And I have to say, Christopher Nolan has talked at length about how much he cared about the Ultra HD Blu-ray release, personally put effort into that, trying to make sure that that really was the pinnacle of the release formats, and it shows. That is the way you want to watch this movie. I have seen Oppenheimer 3 times now because I saw it in IMAX, and I saw it in 70mm film IMAX on the full 1.43:1 aspect ratio IMAX screen. And I mentioned back then, when I saw it that way, that I didn't really think the absolute top and bottom of that image was genuinely necessary. That if you saw it in the 1.9 IMAX aspect ratio, that was probably going to be every bit as good, because there really wasn't much going on at the very tip top and very bottom edges of that 1.43:1 in the IMAX film presentation. And so on disc, on Ultra HD Blu-ray, it is the switching aspect ratios. And it fills the entire 16:9 screen. So it's somewhere in between 1.78, a little bit taller than the 1.9 digital IMAX presentation, not as tall as the 1.43 IMAX film presentation. But I think this is the best way to view this movie. I have seen it. The second time that I saw it was I went ahead and checked it out on Amazon Prime's streaming version, which was just presented in the constant 2.39:1 wide aspect ratio, and that is not the best way to watch Oppenheimer. I think those establishing shots, those outdoor scenes and that benefit greatly from the taller aspect ratios. So I am all on board with Christopher Nolan's choice for what he thinks is the best presentation. The HDR, I thought, almost went slightly overboard. It looked a bit processed. It looked a bit, I don't know if that's really what the IMAX film originally looked like, because it was extra contrasty. To the point that I wasn't quite sure that was truly optimal presentation. I think they might have goosed it a little bit. The shadows were a little bit extra shadowy, and some of the specular highlights were a little bit extra. So it all looked a little overly processed contrasty. But yeah, DTS HD Master Audio 5.1 sound, and I had mentioned that particular leading up to the Trinity test explosion, that very pronounced sound that added a lot of tension to that buildup, which, like I was saying, not exactly a Geiger counter sound, definitely not bass, sort of a static sound that was very noticeable when I saw it in IMAX, was locked into the center height channel speaker that IMAX screens have. They have a center behind the screen, and then they have a dedicated center height. That is the 6th channel in regular IMAX presentations. And I was curious what that was going to be like when translated to the home. So since this is not an Atmos presentation or a DTS-X presentation, it is a 5.1 channel mix. As far as I could tell, that static sound, first of all, can confirm it was definitely not just a broken speaker in the IMAX theater, because that sound is very much still there on the Ultra HD Blu-ray. And as far as I can tell, it's just mixed into the front left and right speakers, not into the center speaker. And maybe with a little bit of phase manipulation to try and get that sort of slightly more diffuse type of sound that happens when it's not perfectly in phase between your front left and your front right. But I didn't get that same sense of it being elevated above me like that dedicated center height presented it when I saw it in the IMAX theater. So not an identical presentation in the home release, because we don't have all the same number of speaker channels, and since Christopher Nolan refuses to mix in immersive audio and just sticks to 5.1. So yeah, but it answered that question for me. And then other than that, I'll just quickly mention that as we're recording this, we're up to 3 episodes of X-Men 97 having been released. And so all I will say about episode 3, and don't worry, I'm not going to go each single episode every week, but I did want to comment on this. They overly compressed a comic book story, in my opinion. This episode raced through what was like a year-long arc in 30 minutes, which meant that I feel they did a bit of a detriment to the story, because if you're a comic book fan, you were the Leonardo DiCaprio meme pointing at the screen going, hey, that name, hey, that thing. Whereas it was just like a meaningless name to anybody who didn't already know the source content. And so it was very much a for the fans only type of tell. And not that you couldn't comprehend plot-wise at all what was going on if you had no familiarity, but I don't think they really did that story particularly good justice in shrinking it down to such a short runtime, and that should have been a 2-parter at the very least, maybe a 3-parter. So a little bit disappointed in episode 3, but it clearly means they have other things they want to get onto for the remainder of the season, and so they raced through that storyline.
So I've actually seen a couple of takes on this from different creators in different formats, different apps and stuff like that, and they're all over the place about this exact thing. And one of them is like, listen, I read all the comics. Yeah, I remember all the comics. You know, this is a great storyline. That was just dragged on forever. They're like all. I mean,
this shouldn't have been an entire season of X-Men 97. No. Certainly not. But one episode I thought was too short.
So, and what they were saying was like, listen, it actually took all the best parts of that and put it into one. Yes, it was very short. It was very truncated, but you just kind of get like the best bits.
It was the Cliff's Notes version, was absolutely the Cliff's Notes version. And I mean, one of the issues I had with it was you had a character who in 30 minutes went by 5 different names. And so they would literally say once in the episode, call me this. And then later on, they're like, call me this. And it was like, but why? There was absolutely no reason to call you those things. It was explained in the comics, but in the show, it's just like, call me that. Specifically for the comic book fans, just being able to go, oh, they called him that. And that was it. It had no meaning in the context of the show itself.
Yeah. So, yeah, if you've never seen it before, you got to the audience of this is theoretically going to be children again at some point, right? I mean, it's not. We can't just keep making things for adults who to relive their childhoods. At some point, we have to, because that's exactly what the Ghostbusters franchise has turned into. It's just like, hey, remember how cool Slimer was when you were a kid? We brought him back. Hey, remember how cool this was when you were a kid? We brought them back too. Yep. And it's just, at some point you got to, I mean, not that they're not making things for kids, but, it just feels like we can only at some point, there's going to be new nostalgia because the old nostalgia is getting a little old. All right. So I finished Ahsoka. I remember last week, I think I only had one episode left to go. Okay. So here's my thoughts on the series as a whole. First of all, it just looks amazing. It's just so well shot. And this is going to come up more when I talk about the last thing that I started watching last night with my son, who made me stop because he wanted to finish the movie with me.
Okay.
But it just looks so good. You know, like every bit of it, I think, looks good. Like there's no part of it where I'm like, oh, they shot that on this thing.
I mean, they did shoot it on the volume, so it's pretty remarkable how they keep improving that thing.
It is just astonishing how good it looks. As far as the story, and I still do kind of have a problem with the direction that they gave Rosario Dawson about how methodical she was to speak. You know, how measured her cadence was. I think that I was like, come on, these conversations can go faster. And it's not ADHD or whatever that's causing that. It's just I really felt like there was a loss of energy in the scenes, and I know that she is perfectly capable of talking.
That is not inherent to Rosario Dawson.
That is not
or
her
like
as an actor. That is somebody told her to do it, and she's like, all right, that's what you want. That's what you'll get. Other than that, though, it was so reliant on you already knowing the story from Rebels. It was so reliant on you. It would
definitely help.
Because the stakes at the beginning, like if you look at the stakes as the series went on, right, it just got bigger and bigger and bigger, which is very indicative of how Rebels kind of worked as a franchise, as if you will. And but the very beginning, you're like, they really care about this person, you know, that that is someplace else and they're trying to get to, and they're really afraid of this other person who's also in that place they don't want to get. So so rarely do I say we need a flashback. We needed a flashback. We needed the end of Rebels to be shot.
Right.
And so that you just saw Thrawn, you know, and Ezra getting shut off by the whatever it was, the moon, the space whales.
The space whales.
You know, into wherever they went, and he saves the day and everybody. You just needed that. To really tell the audience, hey, this is why we care about these two people, and this is why this happens. Because as it went on, I was like, man, these stakes keep getting bigger and bigger. And really, by the last episode, they were like, not only are stakes getting bigger, now we're starting to learn that everybody has different motivations. They want to get different stuff out of it. You know, you got the witch lady who's trying to get this. We got the Jedi, old ex-Jedi guy who's trying to get that, and then his little assistant, who's not very little, but only in comparison to him because he's still ginormous, is trying to do this. And it was like all over the place. I'm like, man, if we had some hints at any point along this story that these people had differing motivations for doing things together. Like he said, you know, we're going to get power, but he made it very much sound like he was going to get it from Thrawn at the very beginning of this thing.
And that's what
and at the end, he was like, no, that's not where I'm getting it at all. Like, really? Really? You're not. Because I kind of feel like that's what you said, exactly word for word. So story-wise, I felt like there were some really good parts of it, and there were some parts of it that they just could have really set up better the whole time. And I liked Rebels. Rebels was fine.
Well, yeah, and I guess there was the thinking, you know, since it is Filoni behind the series, that he was like, well, I don't want to retread Rebels because Rebels already exists. So for the people who had already watched Rebels, I'm not going to like go over it again. But I think because you cannot count on people having watched, how many seasons was Rebels? 5 seasons?
Yeah, something like that.
A couple of them shorter than the others. But yeah, I mean, you absolutely cannot count that someone coming into a live action, essentially mini series, because this isn't really like some prolonged series of television.
Which was not named Rebels Ahsoka. It was named Ahsoka.
It was just named Ahsoka, and we've had her, you know, sprinkled into the Mandalorian.
Clone Wars. What if you just watched the Clone Wars, and that's why you like Ahsoka, and you never watched Rebels? Because
could be the case. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I agree. So things should have enough context on their own that you can get by. Yeah. And that emotional beat with Chopper at the very end of the season of Ahsoka. I mean, it's meaningless on its own.
Yes.
It only means something if you've seen Rebels. Rebels.
Well, not only that, when Sabine like completely betrays Ahsoka to do the wrong thing, whatever, you're like, everyone else who's watching this, who's never seen Rebels, would go, "Oh my God, why are you still friends with this person?" And if you've watched Rebels, you're like, that's literally their whole, that's their deal.
That tracks.
That is exactly what they do. Every time you give them the good decision and the bad decision, they go with the bad decision. Like every single time. Like the Rebels not Rebels, the show is not them rebelling against the Empire.
Right.
It's them rebelling against making the right choice.
Yeah.
Every single time.
Which should be more interesting. That's why they do it.
That I suppose. But anyway, so I finished Ahsoka. It was good. I have problems with it, but I still enjoyed it. I don't know that I'll watch it again. I will watch other things again. I may watch this again. We'll still. I did start Mobius again. God help me.
Do you mean Morbius?
Morbius. Did I say
there
Mobius?
is an R in
Morbius.
there, yes.
Let me put it in there.
Mobius is the name of
artist.
like most recently the character in Loki, right? That
right, Mobius. Yes.
What's his
Anyways,
name?
Morbius, the stupid vampire thing with what's his name.
Morbius.
And I have realized after watching half of it that I have already watched I thought I had only watched half of it, but I have watched the whole thing. And I realized that halfway through, so I'm like,
that be the thing you watch a second time?
I started it just thinking, okay, well, I'll just put it on the background while I'm like doing other things.
Yeah.
And when it gets to the part where because I thought I fell asleep or whatever,
before?
I'll watch the end.
You just never
whatever
got
that
there.
part is.
Yep.
But I got like more than halfway through the movie. I was like, I now remember the last fight scene. I have seen this whole stupid movie. I'm not watching it again. It's really bad.
Well, you did.
Not the whole thing. I did not watch the whole thing.
Web wasn't out yet. You needed something grown worthy, and that just wasn't available yet. So you had to watch Morbius a second time.
Yes. So I will say, what a waste. Okay, I know Jared Leto, or however you say his name, is basically a cult leader, right?
Okay.
I mean, he's got like a whole thing going on. Like there's something, like he is not probably pleasant. He's not probably a pleasant person to be around.
I wouldn't think so.
Right?
No.
And I understand that. But he is just amazing. He's so good to watch.
Yes.
And the special effects, like that first big fight scene with him like teleporting around, stuff like that, it's so good. Like it is so good. And I like watched that and I'm like, man, this could be such a good movie.
Yeah.
And it is just so bad. And I'm going to say this with love. Okay. I'm going to say this with love. It is very hard for me to take somebody who's been in a very popular recent TV series, stick them in a major role of a movie, and have me not go, yeah, that's Doctor Who. I don't know what to tell you. It's Doctor Who. He was goofy in Doctor Who. He is not scary here.
He wasn't particularly scary.
It just does not work.
It's been a while since Matt Smith was Doctor Who, so that's
I don't care.
Well, that's pretty unfair.
I don't care. There was like was it Blade 3 or 4, whatever one it was, where it was like Attack of the TV Stars, where it was like, Ryan Reynolds was kind of brand new into movies, and Jessica Biel was brand new into movies, and it was Parker Posey was like the only like big star left who wasn't cocained out of, well, maybe she was, I don't know, but we know that we know that Blade was. So I just have it just takes me out of the movie. So between that and the fact that the writing is just so bad, that movie is hard to watch. But I did start last night with my son Indiana Jones and Dial of Destiny.
Okay. The final Indiana Jones.
The final. Thank God. If it will be the final. This is almost impossible to watch.
Okay.
As far as I'm concerned.
I have not watched it.
It is almost impossible to watch. Like the first opening sequence is it's all in the past, but it's in Indy's past when he's like in World War II fighting the Nazis and stuff. So they de-age him with the
young
stuff.
Indiana Jones,
and they so he's of the age when he was in like the original movies.
Okay.
So the
Raiders of the
first
Lost Ark,
Raiders
sort of
of the Lost
time.
Ark. Yes, and so they're not de-aging him to super young. They're de-aging him to like, 35 years old or whatever he was at that time. And it mostly does a really good job of it. Like you're sitting there like, wow, that looks really amazing. And then he turns his head too fast. You're like, oh.
The deep fake couldn't quite keep up.
Couldn't keep up. Or there's an action sequence and they're like, oh, they're not going to be looking at his face that closely. Yes, I was. that looks like a video game. Like, it doesn't even look, it stops looking real to me. It is so hard to watch. Not only are those scenes bad, which they are, and it goes on forever. It's like 10 minutes of the opening. The opening sequence is like 10 minutes long. You're like, geez, can you just die? I mean, nothing takes this long in an Indiana Jones movie. But when he gets to the current time,
yes,
I'm like, it looks like it was shot on the back lot of Universal or whatever.
Okay.
I mean, you can just see how the buildings are
the
just
artifice.
It looks terrible.
Oh,
it
dear.
looks awful.
My goodness.
The whole thing. And I'm only halfway through it. But, there's always a suspension of disbelief with Indiana Jones and everything else. But there's also kind of like this, it's grounded in reality to a certain extent.
Sure.
Which is kind of what the whole whip versus gun scene to me in the first movie was like. All these unrealistic things. He's fighting, he's running around, he's doing all this stuff, and then somebody comes out with the not whip, sword, and does a sword thing, and then he just shoots him and walks away. You're like, okay, yes, we are being real here, and as much as we can. This one is just like, no.
Ah, yes.
Yeah, no. We just shoot shotguns at you, and you're hiding behind the world's thinnest piece of metal in an auto rickshaw or a tuk-tuk or whatever they call them, in with the Turkmenistan or whatever they were in. It's just.
I mean, as long as you close your eyes and you can't see them shooting, then they can't hit you. That's the logic.
That might be it. I'm so incredibly disappointed in this movie and how it looks. When you look at Ahsoka,
yes,
right, which had I'm sure a fraction of the budget that Indiana Jones did.
I would think.
And to watch the Dial of Destiny, and like I said, I'm halfway through. I'm an hour and a half into it, so maybe an hour left. I'm just like, geez, this is horrendous.
Well, let's not belabor it then. Let's move on with the podcast. We got plenty to get to this week.
All right, I want to thank our listeners. First of all, this is AVRant, the podcast that answers your home theater and AV questions. To get your questions answered, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. You come to our website, find our show notes, our Flickr albums, where you can follow along with the pictures, as well as older episodes and all the audio. You can listen to it right there on the website if you
sure
want to.
can.
See if you want to find us on Facebook.com/AVRant podcast, YouTube.com/AVRant, where you can see our live recording sessions and our lips out of sync.
It's not too bad these days. It's semi-reasonable.
Yeah, we used to care more.
We did.
Stopped.
Yeah. And we have our individual contact methods as well. I'm at First Reflect all over the place. Tom doesn't have social media.
Yeah, Rob at avrant.com. I'm Tom at avrant.com.
That's it.
All right, I want to thank our listeners of the week. Become a listener of the week. Support the podcast in some way. One of the ways you can do that is go to avrant.com, click on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link, and then send us a PayPal donation. Or you can go to patreon.com/avrantpodcast, where you can sign up to become a contributing supporter every month. They'll take Patreon take some money from you and give most of it to us, a minimum of $1. We have 133 patrons. We want to thank all of you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's very nice. That's patreon.com/AVRant podcast. Once again, if you'd like to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation. So big thanks to our 133 paying patrons over there.
So if you can't support us financially, we understand. Just support us in some other way, and we will talk about you here. First of all, we want to mention Julian. He gave AVRant and me specifically a shout out in his latest video for his Vibe Home Media YouTube channel. He's in Edmonton, Alberta, and they've been having huge temperature swings. A recent frigid night led to a burst pipe that flooded his basement, so he's taking it as an opportunity to upgrade his home theater. He'll be sharing his journey for anyone who wants to follow along. He knows we can share his pain because it's happened to both of us.
Yes, we know it. He said, thankfully, equipment damage, not too much of that, but drywall damage, carpet damage. So that means everything's got to get moved out of the theater. Stuff's, walls and carpets all got to get pulled out. He's like, well, if we're here now, might as well do the theater upgrades that he's been wanting to do for a while. So Vibe Home Media, you can look that up on YouTube and follow along as he puts his theater back together.
So again, we talked last week about Greg, who's offered to send me the Fosse ZA3 amp, which he did. It arrived later on that day, and I hooked it up, and it's been working perfectly. Thank you very much.
There it is. So now we basically have confirmation. Yep, something went wrong with the old Dayton amplifier that Tom's been using for many years at this point. Yeah. So that's great. Thank you, Greg.
Shocking to me that out of everything in this AV world that we have, that every time I buy an amp or get an amp, it's cheaper than the last one. You know what I mean? like everybody else is trying to spend more money on amps to get bigger amps and monoblocks and all this other stuff, and I'm like, the Dayton was like $99, right. And I felt like that was a deal.
It was a
deal. This Fossey, which of course Greg sent to me, and he was very kind to donate that to the podcast, or to me, which is also the podcast. And it was like $69 or something like that. So the next one's
that ZA3 was a little bit more expensive because
is it?
Yeah, the $74.93 that we recommend all the time. That one was like $60.
That's the one I was gonna get.
That's the one you had ordered, but then sent back to Amazon because Greg made this offer. But that ZA3, I believe, is over $100. It's a
is
bit
it?
higher
Look
end.
at me. It's $130. You're right.
There we go.
It's a very pretty amp too.
It's a
for
very
a little
nice amp.
thing. It's very pretty. I like the orange on it. So thank you very much, Greg. He also offered, when we talked last week about me and the Roku fighting, which we will still talk a little bit about. He offered to send me an Apple TV 4K, which I told him to hold off on until we finish our troubleshooting. And Kurt did as well.
So you could have a pair of Apple TV 4Ks. How nice of Greg and Kurt.
I did notice last night that when I was playing Disney Plus, I was getting HDR, but I was not getting Atmos. Okay. So I'm not really sure what's going on with that. So they're going to do a little bit more troubleshooting. So not sure why.
I think swapping out that Roku at this point would be just dandy. I think that'd be a great way to move forward.
Oh, okay. I'll have to let them fight it out.
The price is right, Tom.
I know, but I have such a hard time accepting charity of any sort that it's very hard for me to accept this.
Then don't call it charity. Call it payment.
There we go. Let's not do that. We also got some notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going through, I think, Haiti no longer exists or something. Haiti is real bad these days.
Yep.
I should avoid the news because it's very depressing, and I know that that's terrible. That you can
pretty much count on. Well, look, somewhere in the world, something's going to be going wrong. Yes,
but we're still plugging along here, talking about home theater, and we got thanks from Sasi, Dan, Julian, Clinton, who says he doesn't have a dedicated home theater room, but he still learned plenty from our podcast that's helped him improve his family room setup, and Max. So thank you to all of you.
And I'll say the names one more time. Sasi, Dan, Julian, Clinton, and Max, thank you very much for your notes of gratitude and encouragement. We very much appreciate it. And a big, big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
So this is in the news here. Walmart's acquisition of Vizio is not a done deal yet, but for the first time in a couple of years, Vizio has announced new TV models that will start arriving on store shelves April 29th. Which I don't know how I feel about that. I feel like, if Walmart acquires them, will they be supported as well?
We'll have to wait and see.
Immediately change operating systems and feature sets and decide that those old things are dead to them. Right. So Vizio is reportedly simplifying things by having a single 4K series, no more M series and P series, and then a Quantum series that will launch sometime later this year. Grabbing all the headlines is new 86-inch models priced at basically $1,000.
That's right.
So $1,000 MSRP.
$999. That's the MSRP. You can probably expect that'll be less than that on actual street price.
That very specific screen size almost certainly means it's getting the same IPS panels that LG's LCD TVs as the LG's LCD TVs. So IPS panels combined with a lack of local dimming doesn't exactly bode well for contrast in bright and black levels, except like right near the edge. Contrast would be great.
Not necessarily.
It does have direct LED backlighting instead of edge lighting, at least.
There you go.
That's something. Whatever.
Yeah.
4K. Anyone in this day and age who buys a non-local dimming LCD TV and complains about how it looks literally spent zero time doing research and looked only at prices.
It was definitely about price at that point.
And that's fine. If that's what you care about and you're like, oh, I don't really care that much about. Everybody says they don't care about pictures until they get home and their black screen is cloudy and they're like, why does everything look cloudy? Why are all the reds orange? Well, because you bought a crappy TV and you knew it when you bought it. I already did that. So 4K support tops out at 60 hertz, but it does support VRR and 4K. So if you drop down to 1080p, it can go up to 120 hertz. Support for Dolby Vision HDR10 Plus are on board, but we'd certainly expect this to be a case of HDR compatible, not HDR capable. So there you go.
Yeah. So, I mean, people were, drawn by this price, getting an 86-inch television for MSRP under $1,000. But that is not unique. There are other 85 and 86-inch TVs, lower-end, entry-level models, no local dimming, some of them edge-lit, not even fully direct backlit. So at least I'll give them credit for a fully direct backlight instead of just edge lighting on this model. But similar things, 4K is not going up to 120 hertz. You're not getting 1,000 nit HDR type of highlights.
Telling me that $1,000 86-inch TV is not top of the line,
has some limits,
fully compatible with all major formats and features.
That's
and
right.
Also has the best everything else.
But this just seems to be an indication that Vizio is kind of going back to their initial roots, trying to compete on value once again, because they were moving quite up market for a while there. But then there's just been sort of a span there where we haven't seen any new Vizio models for a little while. So simplifying things, going back to basics, and they're like, yep, we're going to give you a big old TV at a very reasonable price. And that's what we can expect April 29th. We'll see what the Quantum series has in store later.
So what is this? What is this? It's not an M series, not a P series. What is it?
I mean, they just call
series?
it it's the V4K series.
Okay, fair enough. This comes from our listener, Carl. ZapperBox is adding the ability to record DRM-protected NextGen TV, aka ATSC 3.0 channels, to its M1 tuner boxes via a software update on April 8th, which is much better than having it roll out on April 1st.
Sure.
The single tuner version of the M1 is going for $225 on Amazon, while the dual tuner version goes for $275.
Yeah.
The tuners work for both ATSC 1.0 and 3.0 channels, but you can only record non-copy protected broadcasts until now.
Yeah.
Recording DRM-protected NextGen TV channels requires being connected to the internet. ZapperBox says they're working on an offline solution that they hope to release this summer, along with new hardware that will allow for multi-room setups, but neither of those are available today.
Yeah.
For now, the M1 remains a simple over-the-air solution. Plug an antenna directly into the M1, plug an HDMI cable into your TV, and if you want to record anything, either plug in a micro SD card or a USB hard drive for storage. So there you go.
That's right. So we've been waiting a bit for a DVR solution, a recording solution for over-the-air next-gen TV broadcasts that, unfortunately, many of them now include DRM, digital rights management, copy protection, that has, up to this point, prevented us from recording those things from those over-the-air broadcasts. So as far as I know, this ZapperBox M1 is the first available box that you can purchase to get that support. Naturally, I think it makes sense to spend the extra $50 to get the dual tuner version if recording is your priority, because that lets you either record two programs at the same time or watch one program live while recording another program on a different channel. So yeah, that's a nice solution. The price isn't egregious, and you're probably going to want to have that internet connection anyway, because that's how you get your up-to-date guide.
Yeah.
TV guide. Yeah.
Yeah. So just announced, like literally right before this podcast started, Rob was frantically adding this to the news.
Little bit of a news scramble for me, but we couldn't let this wait a week.
Yes, we could not. I clicked. The RBH series, Impression Series is back. The new third generation of RBH's entry-level speaker series has just been released, and you can order them directly from RBH's website. RBH had their EMP Tech.
There was EMP Tech to start out. They spun off a separate little name company. Yep.
Yeah. The Impression Series, and both of these, I believe, kind of died because of complaints, a combination of complaints from dealers who didn't want to compete with other RBH products, and also I think they just ran out of products and decided not to make any more of them.
For a while, at least. That's right.
I don't know. But now they have decided to bring them back.
Generation 3 of the RBH Impression Series. This is their quote-unquote entry level. We loved those EMP Tech speakers.
Yes.
We loved the RBH Generation 2 Impression Series speakers. We thought they were tremendous values, really neutral, tell it like it is, transparent sound for remarkably affordable prices. So here's Gen 3, and we were excited about it.
Yes, so if you like black boxes, this is going to be the
or
series
white
for
boxes. Black or white. They come in black or white. Yeah, that's kind of exciting.
So the 85i, so I for impression and 85 for Shut up. Tower is sold in
8-inch and 5-inch. You gotta like these names, Tom. They're very descriptive. There's an 8-inch driver. There's a 5.25-inch, but an 8-inch driver and a 5-inch driver. So it's the 85i.
The 85i tower is sold in pairs for basically $1,200, $1,195.
That's
it
right.
uses RBH's new fabric dome tweeter with a single 5.25-inch aluminum mid-range driver with a fixed phase plug, which is
That's right.
sexy. Tell you what, phase plugs are like I don't think they make it sound any better or different or whatever, but phase plugs to me are the jewelry I want on every single one of my speakers.
And it is like a signature look of RBH speakers. If you see an RBH speaker, it's going to have a phase plug somewhere.
I love it.
It's a real phase plug. It is a fixed phase plug. That phase plug in the center of that 5.25-inch woofer is not physically moving. The 5.25-inch woofer moves around that phase plug like it should. It isn't just a dust cap shaped into a point like we've seen on some other low-cost speakers. Every once in a while you'll see one of those
where we used to go to, when we'd go to shows, if we saw a phase plug, we'd go up to the driver and poke it to see if the phase plug moved. Because sometimes the phase plug is just like, it's just shaped into, like Rob said. Because they look good. They look good.
And if you are curious why you might want a phase plug on a mid-range driver, it is because it more or less effectively cuts the diameter of that driver in half in terms of dispersion characteristics. So this just means that mid-range driver at 5.25 inches can play to a higher frequency without starting to beam that sound like it would if you didn't have the phase plug in place and you wanted that mid-range driver to play a higher frequency. It would start to get a little laser-like, just because from one side of the driver to the other, if that distance is greater than the wavelength that driver is producing, then you'll start to get very directional sound with lots of sound wave cancellation going out to the sides. That is kind of key to these designs because they have crossed over that mid-range driver to that tweeter at 3,000 hertz, which is higher than normal. They did that for power handling reasons, and this is all a very reasonable design because RBH, believe it or not, knows how to design some speakers.
They have one with a is it just
we're gonna get there, Tom.
One speaker? Okay, I'm not listening to you.
You're skipping ahead.
Anyways, where were we with the fixed phase plug? A single 8-inch aluminum woofer at the bottom provides an extension down to a claimed 45 hertz at minus 3 dB, and RBH has always been very honest with their claims.
And that is a higher minus 3 dB point than we might expect to be claimed from a tower this size with an 8-inch dedicated base driver down there, which means, once again, they are going for, hey, this is what we have. First, A, we're being honest about our specs, but B, we're going for higher output capability rather than just trying to dig down to the last octave of bass in a tower speaker. Also, outrigger feet included. So, I mean, this is essentially a $600 speaker, right? If it was sold individually, it would be $600 each. That's a pretty reasonable price for a pretty darn capable tower speaker.
So the 5i, which obviously has a 5.25-inch woofer and a tweeter, bookshelf is sold for $350 each, the same tweeter and 5.25-inch driver, and they only claim 70 hertz minus 3 dB extension, even though it's rear ported. Which,
that's
again,
right.
Rob's saying, it is very much a output versus extension. And when we're crossing everything over at 80 hertz, as we should be, then it doesn't matter. So
I
you
like
could say,
this design choice. I'm glad they didn't move away from it. There was market pressure for them to move away from this choice in their design. I'm glad they did not do it.
So the 55i sells for $450 each, and it's here to tick off Reddit. Oh, God help us. I love it. I love it.
That's right.
Its dual 5.25-inch drivers are positioned above and below, or on either side of the 1-inch tweeter, because it's MTM design, or Diapolito.
That's right.
RBH claims that despite the MTM design, they've engineered it to have a very similar dispersion both vertically and horizontally, so this is an LCR speaker that can be used in either orientation. How dare they? Reddit will hate this. You're absolutely right.
Just
Reddit
look at it, Tom.
MTM.
How could it work? It's a driver and then a tweeter and then another identical driver. And if you put that horizontally and use it as a center, supposedly that could never work, even if you're a competent speaker engineer and you know about these things and you design the crossover and the dispersion characteristics of those drivers so that you could use this design and have it work completely reasonably well.
Let me tell you something about Reddit. Shut up. That's what I would say about Reddit.
Good
okay,
enough.
The way that I can post so very infrequently on Reddit, and yet every single time they're like, well, that's not the question I asked. I'm like, yeah, but that's the answer to the question that you asked. The answer was, this is what you should do. Oh, that's not it. I'm like, I'm pretty sure it is. Anyways, I will link up, or I'm going to send Rob a link for the MTM's center speakers, Why All the Hate, which basically addresses this whole stupid... I don't want to call it a controversy.
Well, because
it's like a belief.
MTM speakers can have problems if you turn them horizontally and it wasn't designed properly to be used that way. They absolutely can have problems. That isn't what we're saying. But if you know about it and you design around it ahead of time, you can make that speaker design
You'd be
work.
shocked how well designed a speaker can be if you well design it. You know what I mean? I hate to say it, but that's what it comes down to. People are like, well, I bought this MTM speaker, that cost $25, brand new, and it sucked. So it must be the MTM design, not the fact that it was $25. The 12i subwoofer goes for $900. It's basically a 16-inch cube, and it uses a passive radiator design with its 350 watt amp. They claim extension down to 29 hertz, minus 3 dB. Did something just happen with the camera?
I don't know. I didn't notice it on my end.
Okay, because I just got a thing that popped up.
Okay.
The back panel provides both RCA and XLR ins and outs, and there's a fully variable phase knob.
Hooray!
Which makes Rob happy.
It does.
All models use HDF cabinets, not MDF, and 2 finish options are available, black satin and white satin. The finish options are paint, not veneer. The grills use MDF frames and connect via magnets. So there aren't any visible speaker grill mounts, but that's not the end of the story.
No.
There are also on-wall models, and the on-wall models come with tweeter options. The 5IW, let's see if you can figure out the naming convention here.
That's right.
Sells for $300 each. Got the same drivers as the 5i bookshelf, but in a 3 3/4 inch deep sealed cabinet with a French cleat wall mount. Which, if you don't know what the French cleat is, think of it as an angle, a 45-degree angle.
Yeah. Facing
down, so that you can put another piece with a 45-degree angle facing up, and they just go bloop, and they
That's right.
plop in. The magnetically attached grills add another half-inch to the depth. But if you want a taste of RBH's folded ribbon tweeters, there's the 5IWR.
That's right.
Oh, that's great. The 5IWR reference that sells for $500 each. The 55IW for $425 each, and the 55IWR for $700 each are exactly what you would expect. Dual driver versions and sealed on-wall designs. And lastly, there are 3 speakers in one bar on-wall models that are only sold through dealers, whatever. No one cares about those. All right. So here's the question. These on-wall ones are completely sealed.
That's right.
So you could just stick it in the wall if you really wanted to.
You kind of could. It doesn't come with dog legs to make them, a direct in-wall speaker. But
you'd have to work at it.
They've kind of got an appropriate depth. So as long as you're willing to basically open your wall and put in your own block framing to hold these speakers, you could do it that way.
Which I think is this to me, if it were me, I would want them to have a bracket solution that you could, place it in wall if you wanted to, and have it like a little proud with maybe.
Frankly, these just got announced, so if we end up seeing in-wall Impression Series speakers coming from RBH, I will not be surprised.
Yeah.
That will not be a shock to anyone.
So the things that I just at first blush here, I really like Rob. I do like the fact that they're not trying for the greatest extension. You can make if you're on Reddit and you're like, oh, I want a really good speaker for movies, this would be the easiest way to make that argument.
Yep.
This is a movie speaker because it doesn't dip really low, and you wouldn't want to play them full range. Any of these speakers full range, not the towers, not anything.
No.
I like the fact that that they have specifically addressed the whole, we made this LCR. It's a Diapolito. It's an MTM design.
That's
and yes,
right.
You can put it in any direction you want. If if you don't think so, fight us, because we're going to win. The third thing I really like here is that the towers have that outrigger feet, which is honestly not that big of a deal. But it does 2 things.
These are a very narrow speaker, so without them.
Yeah. Well, there's that. But there's also the fact that it, like the phase plug, it elevates the entire design for
a little
me.
bit, yeah.
Yeah, and it gives it that sort of audiophile cachet
Sure.
that you don't see with other speakers. That the 85i looks very much like a Totem speaker. If you've ever seen the Totem brand, they often are just a single tweeter, single woofer, and a very thin, tall cabinet.
Yeah.
It's a very similar sort of design with the outrigger feet. I mean, it's just black paint, white paint. This is a no frills. You're paying for performance speaker.
Yeah.
And honestly, I'm here for it.
I wouldn't be shocked if at some point in the future we see, floor standing and bookshelf and center models that have that folded ribbon tweeter as the option instead. Yes. An impression reference series for the in-room speakers as well. I'm a little bit surprised that we see them in the on-wall versions first, but that's probably a hint of things to come as well.
Yeah.
I imagine price differential will be very, very similar because essentially all that changed. Well, I mean, they would have changed the crossover as well because the folded ribbon tweeter doesn't have the same crossover profile as the fabric dome tweeter. Yes. But I would, if you just take the price deltas on the on-wall versions, dome versus ribbon tweeter there, I'm expecting that we'll see some in-room impression reference series speakers coming in the not too
looks like
future as well.
I mean, it's just a drop-in replacement. As far as the cabinet design is concerned.
Yes, that's right. As
like
far as the
tweeter itself is
tweeter.
just popping in there. So yes, you would have to put a different crossover with it, like Rob said. So I do not see RBH offering this as an upgrade option. Like you can buy they do with the Sens. You can buy this speaker and then we'll set, you can also buy the kit that will allow you to upgrade. That's not what they're going to do. They are, I believe, like Rob said, there's going to be a 5IR. There's going to be
I think so.
85IR. I think they're all going to come out with this folded ribbon. There's no reason not to do it.
If they don't be mad at RBH because that's purely us speculating at this point. We can only confirm what is on their website and available to purchase today. But yes, these things would not be shocking to us if they come to pass. Right. That's what we're saying.
And they have full systems all built up for you.
That's
here with 5.1 and 7.1 systems. And I think this is...
The only thing I would say out of this lineup that I don't consider to be a really, really, really good value is that subwoofer. $900 for a 12-inch sub that only, goes down to 29 hertz. That's going to be a very honest 29 hertz extension. Yes. I don't think that's shoving it into a closet somewhere and taking the measurement that way.
You
that's
put it in a corner and you probably get it down to like 25, 24 maybe, but you're still never hitting 20.
If you have $900 to spend, you can get a more capable subwoofer than this one. So grab some RBH Impression Series speakers, pair them up with, say, a monolith subwoofer, and I think you are laughing all the way to a very nice performance at a very reasonable price.
This is going to be the recommendation for a while. And RBH has done this to us every single time. Yep. Every time somebody, they've come out with a speaker line that you can buy directly from them, and we're like, this is it. This is the one you should buy. Yep. For everybody. Nobody's... There's just
quite few rooms where this isn't going to be able to perform very nicely.
Yes.
Because they went for that output capability.
Yeah, this is going to be the go-to. And the fact that they have the tower speakers are thinner and smaller footprint is also very, very good.
I really like that they have that white finish option because there are definitely times where I don't just want a plain black box in a living room setup, a family room setup, where I want a little bit more distinctive looks than just very plain black boxes, and just having that white finish option, I think,
especially for those people who are trying to set these things up in living rooms and family rooms and stuff, because right now, and for a long time, the light colored walls and gray or dark colored floors has been sort of the norm. You go into any house right now, especially brand new or recently renovated, and you're going to see like gray or wood floors, gray tile or wood floors, and then white walls everywhere. So putting white speakers on the ones, light gray, putting white speakers on wall white speakers makes perfect sense. So Comments from our listeners. We got one here. Clinton says he got away from buying overpriced cleaning solution for his eyeglasses. So when he heard us recommending eyeglass cleaner for cleaning TV screens, he figured he'd share the homemade cleaning solution that he uses for his glasses. It works for him. And it closely mimics any commercial glasses cleaning products. And so it ought to be equally safe for TV screens. It's just 3/4 I guess, by volume.
Isopropyl alcohol, which is like rubbing alcohol.
Rubbing alcohol and 1/4 water. So remember that isopropyl alcohol comes in a concentration. Sometimes it'll be 70%, sometimes 90%. Different. So that means it's already got some water in it.
Yeah, that's right.
He didn't specify which one. So by volume. So
that's right.
Let's go by cup. So
Sure.
3/4 cup of the alcohol, 1/4 cup of water, just to thin it out a little bit more. A couple of drops of dishwashing liquid should do the trick and save a bit more money.
Well, yeah.
For
a bit less money.
Yeah, for a bit less money. So if you're into that sort of thing, I just know that you should never use anything with ammonia in it, like
that's right.
Windex sort of things on your glasses.
And if you go and look up what is in dishwashing liquid, it's pretty much the ingredients in eyeglasses cleaner that is missing.
Yes,
it's just a surfactant, that helps act as a detergent rather than a soap, so it doesn't leave the soap scum on there. So that should work. I have no problem with that. Honestly, I don't know if I've ever bought eyeglasses cleaner because, I get a new prescription whenever I need it. And of course, the people that sell my glasses just throw in some eyeglasses cleaner that comes along with it. And I don't know that I've ever completely drained all the bottles of eyeglasses cleaner that I've gotten just from updating my prescriptions every couple of years. So, I don't know that I'm spending that much separately on eyeglasses cleaner. Microfiber cloth does most of the cleaning for me. But if you happen to go through enough of it, you have some big TVs and a whole bunch of them, and you want to make your own and save a little money, then I'm perfectly fine backing that.
Yeah. All right, to the questions. James appreciated our discussion about his living room setup versus his enclosed home theater setup, a converted spare bedroom, where he's using a Denon X6200W receivers in both setups, but he only likes the way Audyssey sounds in his living room. In the theater, he said Audyssey sounds muddy and lacking in dynamics. First up, he says he realized he used the wrong terminology thanks to us. He does not use Audyssey dynamic volume in his home theater. He uses dynamic EQ, which is better. So thank you.
Yes.
That's the thing he wants to keep, since he and his wife pretty much always listen with the master volume set lower the reference, which is 0 dB. But when he compares Audyssey on versus Audyssey off, he thinks the theater sounds better and less muddy with Audyssey off. So we want to know if there's a way to separate dynamic EQ from the room correction.
There is not. No. You cannot just turn on dynamic EQ in a Denon and Marantz receiver without also having the automated equalization applied. So, the closest thing that was sort of out there, some of the old Anthem AV receivers allowed you to separate the curves of equal loudness from the dynamic range compression in Dolby volume, but there's nothing modern that has that capability. And then I suppose THX certified ones, if you use the THX listening mode, there is THX Loudness Plus, which is kind of a curves of equal loudness application, but also ends up activating that re-EQ feature, which is going to roll off the treble when you do it. So there's no really honest practical solution that I can say here. Yamaha has their YPOW volume, but you have to have YPOW activated to make that work. So same thing, the EQ is going to be getting applied.
So, for the record, he's tried both Audyssey Reference and Audyssey Flat, neither of which sounded as good as Audyssey just being off, except for the dynamic EQ benefits. So, next, his love seats, a recliner. It's a love seat recliner, are not pushed up against the back wall. They're about 3 feet off the back wall to allow the door at the back to swing open, but the room is small, just under 12 feet long and under 10 feet wide. And Rob guessed it, both of his subs are at the front of the room, and all of his 7.2.2 speaker setup uses monitor audio speaker and subs. I'm scrolling. I'm looking at these pictures at the same time. So his right wall is a bookshelf full of movies.
That's correct.
And
that's going to get described too.
That's the only thing I can see. He's got 8 IKEA storage units on the right side of the wall holding up his physical media, another 2 IKEA units on either side of his window on the left wall. The door takes up the rear left corner, and the right rear corner is already occupied, so he didn't think there's a good place to put his dual subs except at the front 2 corners. Plus, it just bugs him if they don't look symmetrical up front. Well, you're going to have to be bugged. Turn the lights off. Stop it.
I also have what I think could be a solution to this. Yeah.
He's made Rockwell absorption panels, and he also has some Pro acoustic foam bass traps, which don't do anything.
Yeah, if they're foam, they are not bass traps. Full stop.
They're not bass traps. Yes. They can call them whatever they want. They can call them
Yes.
a Lamborghini, but you're not going to be able to drive them down the
They
street.
might be thick. They might be providing some absorption of a type, but it will not be base. If they are foam, they are at best acting like a very thin acoustic absorber that is actually made of proper insulation.
So once again, he says he has carefully followed proper Audyssey microphone placement guidelines during setup. If you follow the Audyssey placement guidelines, like the ones that were on the screen, they are not correct. They show seats, the microphone moving from seat to seat,
Right?
Which is not correct. And in fact, it is not correct based on Chris Kyriakakis. Did I say it right?
Yes. Yep.
Who was interviewed on this podcast, and he walked us through how you're supposed to do it. And I will once again link you up to an article that I wrote that goes through that procedure that Chris walked us through, so that you will know how to actually do it correctly. But anyways, properly follow the whatever microphone setup. But the end result was that with Audyssey on, things sound muddy and lacking dynamics. He wants the benefits of dynamic EQ, but how can he have that and the sound quality he wants to achieve? So, okay. Many times people will want to have a thing, but they're not willing to do the thing that gets them the thing. Okay. Like, I want to run a marathon. I do not. Let's pretend I wanted to run a marathon, right? But I do not want to practice running and
train
run
every
often
single day
and train.
Sure.
I don't like to run. It makes my knees hurt. And I don't want to spend very much money on shoes. So I'm only willing to spend $30 on a pair of shoes. Full stop. I'm not going to spend any more. And I don't want to have to train. And I don't want my knees to hurt when I run. But I want to be able to run the Boston Marathon and win. At least get in the top 3. Right? So you can see how the restrictions I put on what I was willing to do will it precludes me from being able to get the result I want. And that's kind of where we're at right here with this situation with this room. We've got and there's I want my subwoofers to be at the front of the room because it looks better to me. Great. But I also want the bass in the room not to sound muddy and bloated and weird, but I don't want to move my subs. Well, okay. I want Audyssey's dynamic EQ, but I don't want Audyssey to be on. Well, you're putting restrictions on what you're willing to do in order, and then saying, but I still want the result that I want. And it really can't be done, at least not cheaply, without you either making a concession someplace or a change someplace, or just saying, well, I'm just not going to have what I want because I can't have what I want. I mean, I can't win the Boston Marathon because I won't train and I won't buy I won't buy the proper equipment that I need.
Like, to be fair, he's saying he thinks it sounds clearer and more dynamic by just turning Audyssey off altogether.
Yeah.
So he's like, well, why can't I just keep that clarity of sound, but then add curves of equal loudness to it? So logically that makes sense. But I mean, I just wanted to point out a couple of things. I'll start with the substance. We already talked about it. I'm not really seeing a reason why they couldn't go at the midpoints of your 2 side walls. I know you already have your IKEA, shelves there that are holding your content, but like, those were IKEA shelves. They are not physically attached to your walls, like in a completely permanent way. And the subs that you're using are not gigantic. Those are not enormous monitor audio subwoofers that you're using. So, if you put a gap, you separate some of those shelves on your right wall, because it's not as though the right wall completely lines the right hand wall. There is some space to like put a gap in those shelves on the right hand wall, and then there's a space under your window on the left hand wall. Since you're a fan of symmetry, I don't see why you couldn't have mid-wall, side-wall placement for your subwoofers. As I suspected the first time that we talked about this, I think a good portion of what's going on here is muddiness that's being caused by masking effect of non-optimally placed dual subwoofers in a very compact room that is preventing you from having, the best bass foundation, which then crossing over to your speakers in a uniform way. You've only got these 2 seats, and like, he's saying he used proper microphone technique, but like, did you start with the microphone actually in the middle of those 2 seats, which neither person actually sits there? Because if you started with it in your seat, which is the left or the right seat, then that could have an impact on how things are being calibrated as well. So
I actually have an article about that too.
Yeah, I think
specifically about love seats, about how to place your microphone on a love seat.
Yeah, I think there's things you could do about the bass in this room. And then we do have a picture of the front of your room. Obviously, that was, aesthetic concerns as well. You've got those 3 monitor audio speakers all below the projection screen, but right up against the wall, and critically, a TV stand, an equipment stand, a low, TV stand below the center speaker and the projection screen that, if that center speaker were sitting on that TV stand rather than being wall mounted, it's like right at the back with nothing absorptive below it. So you're getting a very strong reflection off of the top flat, hard surface of that TV screen, which I would expect to create some dialogue intelligibility problems. And then, not exactly optimal placement of the front left and right speakers either. So I'm not completely shocked that this doesn't have optimal sound quality at your seats, because it's not like you are getting the benefits of some great distance that's going to allow that sound to diffuse and not be highly directional. You're getting a high proportion of direct sound from those front speakers. So, I think there
it's
are
also got
things...
the speakers turned on their sides too, which is not how they're meant to be oriented.
I wouldn't expect that alone to be
it's just another...
It's just
another
slightly
variable
non-optimal.
here.
That's right. Yeah.
And you were talking about the bounce off the front the center speaker. You're also going to get. I'm assuming he's got his tweeters on the outside.
To the outsides, sure.
Could be on the inside, but it might be on the outsides. There's also a bounce off the top of the subwoofers that he's got there as well.
Yeah,
which are right below those. So you're looking at a number of different things.
I'm thinking, that center speaker can sit on that TV stand, but bring it to the front edge of that TV stand. That's a pretty simple, low-cost thing for you to do there.
I think it's wall-mounted is the thing.
It does look like it's wall-mounted, but I'm just, that's a thing you could do without spending money, because it should be able to just sit on a TV stand. The front left and right speakers, they could go on speaker stands. I'm not seeing anything there that precludes that, other than just maybe
or wall-mount them up a little bit higher on either side of the screen.
On either side of the screen, yeah.
Yes, and they don't have to be in line with the center speaker.
Move the subwoofers to the midpoints of the 2 side walls by moving those bookcases on the right, and I think we'll address a lot of the issues that you're talking about.
I don't necessarily think he has to do that with the subwoofers. I know that you're trying to give him symmetry.
Yes.
But moving those bookshelves is almost certainly going to be a non-starter for him. First of all, IKEA bookshelves, once you put them in place, they don't like to be moved. Because they fall apart. Because they're IKEA bookshelves. I know, it's fine. But what you could do is basically take your right subwoofer, move it to the back of the room. I know you want symmetry or whatever.
Yeah.
Throw a acoustically transparent cloth over the top of these things and call them, I don't know, boxes or whatever. Put the right one in the back of the room as near whatever that obstruction is that's back
near
there.
that, as near to that rear right corner as you're able. Sure.
Yeah, and then in the front, the front one on the front left side, move that into the wall, into the room near that wall. The exact same amount that the other one's off the back wall. You could
put a subwoofer on the right side wall in front of whatever it is that's taking up that right rear corner, because there's a gap between that thing and the IKEA bookshelf, and then you can have a sub in the front left on the left side wall, and then closer to the window. So they are diagonally across the room from each other. Symmetry that way, just not visually.
Right. So there's a lot of changes I would make. So what Rob said about moving the center channel so that the front of the speaker is proud of the front of the
front edge.
The front edge of the entertainment center. I would rotate 90 degrees the left and right speakers. I would move them up a little bit just to get them, just so that first bounce is not off the top of a speaker or on top of the cabinet, depending on how you have them situated, is on the ground, which is carpet, which is good. I would move the subwoofers, as you said. I would get rid of whatever these foam traps are and get actual bass traps. I am not convinced that a slap echo is not still. I mean, I know you're a couple of feet off the back wall, but I'm not convinced that there's not a slap echo issue happening here as well, because it definitely can still be happening. This room, like, oh well, I've got all this diffusion. No, you don't. First of all, these things are almost all this exact same depth. All of your discs are the same depth. You've just created a different wall on that side. Is all you've done. You've moved it in a little bit. So putting as much absorption in here as possible is imperative to you getting better sound. And I think that the solution to your issue is not how can I figure out a way to get dynamic EQ without having Audyssey? The solution is, how can I make it so that Audyssey can do the best it can do, and then everything will work. Not only will you get the dynamic EQ you want, but everything will sound better, full stop.
Yeah.
Which is what we should be going for here. We shouldn't be going for, out of these two things that I have compared, this is the one that sounds better, so I want that one. You should be saying, out of these two things I've compared, neither one of them is up to my standard, and I should have something better than this. And that's what we should be going for, in my opinion. So, linked up a couple of things here. Of course, Rob gave you a bunch of suggestions as well. Brian is currently has an unfinished room in his basement, 17 by 26 by 7.5, so roughly 3,300 cubic feet in total air volume. He is in the planning stages to finish the room and use it as a multi-purpose space with a home theater area on one side. Will somebody tell the sound waves not to go to that other side, or they'll have to go in timeout? His intentions at the moment are to have the TV on a stand in the middle of one of the shorter 17-foot walls. How far are these walls? 17 by 26, okay. And put the main couch directly in front of it, about 7.5 feet eyes to screen, for a 77-inch OLED. And then the rest of the room will be open behind that main couch, okay, which is a pretty typical setup. He's also got plans for a love seat on, or another couch on the left wall.
Sure. But that's not the primary seats, and this is a very reasonable setup. I prefer this sort of orientation to the, the right side of the room is the home theater, and I've got it set up like as if that were lengthwise, but only half of the room, and then just having like a completely open left wall, say. I prefer this setup where basically the opening to the rest of the room that isn't the theater area is behind you. I like that.
I just scanned down and saw the first question. I was like, well, I was going to answer it without reading it, because my first thought was the answer to this first question, but I will refrain. So we'll be using Martin Logan Foundation Series speakers with their folded ribbon tweeters, plus a pair of monoprice SW15 subs, which he intends to place at the physical midpoints of the two longer 26-inch walls.
Hooray! Thumbs up from us.
There's
Hooray!
one battle we don't have to fight.
That's right.
One dragon slain already. Fiscal midpoints of the two longer 26-inch walls, so both subs will be behind the main couch.
Yeah.
You hearing that? Symmetry. Just not where you can see it. He'd like to know, first of all, do we think it makes sense to aim for a 7.2.4 configuration, or should he stop at 5.2.4? 5.2.4, please.
And I agree. Yes. Yeah. In fact, the diagram that he's shown, which was, quickly mocked up, it's not like he's being super precise about these, but I'm like, I like what you've done there. I think that is a very reasonable setup that you have chosen for what you intend to do. I like it.
Yes. He's got the surround slightly behind the couch and elevated. He's got the mains flanking the TV.
That's right.
And he's got the subs in the midpoint of the 26-inch walls. And I suppose he's going to have the overheads a little bit in front of and a little bit behind the couch, and they'll be physically far enough away.
Think. Yep.
I think this is a good setup. I like it. We're done.
Yes.
Oh, wait, he has more questions. He was planning to have in-ceiling speakers for the overheads. Would he be better off stopping at just two overhead speakers, or do top front and top rear positions? Still makes sense. I would do top front and top rears.
Yep, having the four overheads completely makes sense in this setup. If you really want to, it's as simple as a perhaps slight rewiring job and resetting in the configuration. If you're just like, what do those top rears sound like if I just have them in the surround backs? If you're super curious about it, it gives you the option to do that too. But if you basically did 45-degree elevation angle in front of you, your seats, the forward-facing seats, of course, 45-degree elevation angle behind you. Call them, you can label them as front heights and rear heights. If you're listening to a bunch of DTS-X content and you want the most discrete sounds, you can just change those labels because that still works for everything. But for the physical placement, 45-degree elevation angles in front and behind, and I think you've got an excellent setup that way. And that's what I would recommend.
Okay. Will the Denon X3800H be able to provide enough wattage all on its own? Would stepping up to the X4800H be helpful? The Martin Logan Foundation towers do have a 4 ohm nominal impedance. Yeah.
So he's 7.5 feet away in terms of just distance from the front speakers and distance to the surrounds too. There's going to be no issue there. The only thing that might be a question is the crossover region, right?
That's what I'd be worried about,
upper bass, the lowest part of the mid-range, right into that crossover region. It's not inconceivable that at full reference volume, if that's what you're actually going for, you might just mathematically require a bit more output in the bass from the speakers themselves. The thing is, the X4800H is not going to give that to you over the X3800H. So that wouldn't be a reason to spend more money on the receiver. And the X3800H has a full set of pre-outs that give you the option to easily add external amplification to, say, your front three speakers in the future. So what I would do, my honest advice would be, get the X3800H, start with just that, hook it up, and use things that way. Because chances are you aren't listening in a multi-purpose room like this at full reference volume. Chances are at a 7.5 foot distance for the direct sound, the mid-range, and the treble, it's going to absolutely seem loud enough with just the X3800H on its own. But if you do crank it up to full 0 dB, full reference volume, and that's your normal thing to do, I wouldn't be opposed to perhaps adding a 3-channel amp for the front 3 speakers, and that should be more than enough. And the combined cost of doing that will be less than just going up to the X4800H.
Yeah.
So I think that's the solution.
I think so too. You really, when you're sitting close to speakers, you're generally speaking, you don't have to worry that much about them getting loud enough because they get loud enough fairly easily. It's the crossover region, which we've talked about multiple times, that you do have to be concerned about. And in a room like this where you are physically close to the speakers, you might be able to get away without it. You might be able to. You're just going to have to test it out, and you'll know. So the Martin Logan Foundation bookshelf speakers have a port on the back, so when he wall mounts them as surrounds, is that going to be an issue? Do we have a recommendation for good wall mount solution? I do. Yeah. avgadgets.com/best speaker mounts for walls or ceilings.
Yep.
There you go.
And it's going to be the Video Secu side clamping wall mounts. Even though on Video Secu's own website, they list them at $50 each as the MSRP, you won't pay anywhere near as much. It's $30 for a pair of them on Amazon.com. So I don't see them breaking the bank whatsoever. They can hold 33 pounds each, so absolutely no problem holding those Martin Logan bookshelf speakers. And they have that side clamping design, so you can aim them, swivel them, tilt them slightly if you want to, and it'll give you absolutely sufficient space for that rear port. They really only need about 1.5 inches, 3 inches at most between the physical wall and that rear port, and you can easily do that with those Video Secu mounts. So affordable, work really nicely, and that's what I would get.
All right. John T. in the UK. I guess we have more than one John, so I'll say his initial. John has a 65-inch Sony XH95 TV from 2020. It's the same as the X950H series here in North America.
Mm-hmm.
Stupid naming conventions. A Denon X2700H receiver, and his sources are a Panasonic UB820 Ultra HD Blu-ray player, an Apple TV 4K, and a Sky TV satellite box. As expected, whenever there is a change in the signal, his TV goes black for a second or two before it locks onto the new signal. But recently, his TV started to stay black, and he had to turn it off and back on again to get the picture and sound back.
Yep.
He did a thorough vacuuming job on his gear, and he replaced his HDMI cables with new ultra-high-speed certified cables, and he tried unplugging and restarting everything. When none of that helped, he simply tried HDMI input 2 on the Sony instead of HDMI 3, which is the eARC port. And that seemed to work. It's back to functioning like it used to, just minus HDMI eARC, of course.
Yeah.
But he wasn't sure. Is there any downside in terms of audio or video quality by using one of the other HDMI inputs on his Sony TV? So usually on the TVs, including mine, there'll be some that are labeled like HDCP 2.2 or HDMI 2.1. They'll be labeled something like that, or 4K or 8K or something.
4K and 8K, yeah, some little label.
Pretty
like
common.
That.
And then other ones will relabeled something else.
Mm-hmm.
So the eARC one is going to be the highest. The highest that's available. Sure. The one that's right next to it is probably also the highest that's available. It just doesn't have the eARC associated with it, which is fine. If you're not, it sounds like he's not using it. If you're not using it, just pick one of the other ones that are just the same I guess, labeling as the one that you've got on there.
Yeah, that is certainly the general advice. And as long as you are okay, you're not actually using the built-in streaming apps of the television itself, and so not having an eARC connection anymore is not hurting you in any way. There's nothing wrong with using a different HDMI port. In the case specifically of your XH95 or X950H, if you had bought it in North America, it actually just has 4 identical HDMI 2.0 ports. It doesn't have any HDMI 2.1 ports, 40 or 48 gigabits per second. They're all 18 gigabits per second ports. So as far as the audio video quality from external sources, it's identical no matter which of the HDMI ports you use on that particular Sony model. So as long as you're fine not having eARC anymore, you've done zero damage to the audio video quality going into that television. And it was almost certainly just literally gravity, friction. That HDMI connection on the eARC port has gotten just a little bit loose. That's why I don't like HDMI as a physical plug. That's just
one of the many reasons we don't like HDMI. I did write an article about this, but it hasn't been published yet.
It is not a great physical
design. Some of the solutions for how to secure your HDMI cable to your device, and it involves that little screw that's above every HDMI port. So, Ryan, first up, last summer, we helped Ryan make a bunch of decisions for a small dedicated home theater room. He says we saved him a lot of money by explaining why he shouldn't follow the advice he got from a Best Buy consultant regarding his choice of speakers, and we saved him another $1,800 by going with a silver ticket screen instead of Screen Innovations. We'll just $800. Just give us the $800 on that. You can keep the $1,000.
AVRant.com, right-hand side, PayPal donation.
That's right, PayPal donation. We helped him with his ceiling, or you could do like $100 a month for 18 months.
You could. Spread it out a little.
On the Patreon. So we helped him with his ceiling, or $10 a month for 180 months.
There you go. That'll go beyond episode 1000.
We helped him with a ceiling speaker configuration and placement. We helped him pick out his new wall color and the mount for his projector. It sounds like we earned our $1,800.
What a resource.
There were no disappointments following our advice. So he wanted to share a couple of before and after photos, and he wanted to express his gratitude to us. You know what really expresses gratitude? This is the same guy that just a few moments ago said he doesn't like taking charity.
That's right.
This obviously I have to say it as a joke because I can't do emotionally. I can't do it, Rob. I'm working on my therapist. I'm not working on my therapist. Working with my therapist on this. Because he uses this theater all the time and he couldn't be happier with it. So thank you from Ryan to us. And don't judge how the center speaker looks in this photo he sent. It's perfectly positioned on its own stand now. It's just an old photo. So we got some pictures here. Everything's white. White.
It was before. White. That was the before.
Yes. This is the before.
White room.
And now everything's blue.
Don't actually know what the wall color is because the lights are blue. I believe gray. He said it's a dark gray. Yes.
It's got to be a dark gray. Yeah. So he's got his it looks like he used to have a center on a box.
That's right. Well, I mean, that was just when he first set it up. He's like, "Yep, I got a box." And
it looks great. It looks phenomenal.
Oh, it looks fantastic. Yes,
it looks great. Look, I like the bean bags. I'm pretty sure that was my idea.
Yep,
I'm pretty sure I said that because I say that a lot. So no questions from Ryan about home theater gear at the moment, but he did want to ask us, what do we think about the long-term viability of both physical media and streaming? On the one hand, physical media sales numbers keep dropping, but there does seem to be a dedicated audience of collectors, and prices are going up. Welcome to the world of vinyl. With more of the marketing for discs moving towards that collector's crowd. Over in streaming land, prices are going up, ads are getting inserted, and features like Dolby Atmos are being taken away from the less expensive tiers. There's plenty of chatter online with people saying they're going back to physical media because of these changes to streaming. Yeah. Okay, let's online chatter is worth the.
That's cheap. Talk is cheap.
Yeah. And especially whenever titles disappear or get yanked from digital libraries. What do we think is actually going to come of all of this? I mean, historically, let's just take a look at what has happened with physical media. Some of it dies. Some of it does. You could make the argument, I think, rightfully, that vinyl was dead for a very long time. And
certainly proclaimed as such, yes.
They kind of, they've revived it lately. Yeah, they kind of started. Somebody will like decide that they want to put out a vinyl, and they'll remind everybody that they exist and they have a turntable collecting dust in the back corner, and dust off their recordings, and they'll go, "Oh my god, it sounds so amazing," and then they'll hear it on Pandora and go, "Oh my god, it sounds so much better on Pandora," and then that'll be the end of that. But VHS died, clearly, but DVD is still kicking, man.
Yes,
DVD has not died.
Definitely not. And it easily outsells Blu-ray and Ultra HD Blu-ray, which is Ultra HD Blu-ray is a drop in the bucket.
Yes, a drop in the bucket is by far.
Blu-ray is not insignificant, but DVD outsells all of it easily.
So the question, you have to ask, or we have to answer in this case, is, are we going to see DVDs get replaced by Blu-rays and or Ultra HD Blu-rays over time? Because DVD players are just, they don't exist anymore. But the reality is that most people do not care, just like the people that are looking at the 85-inch $1,000 Vizio and are like, why wouldn't I buy that? And where I can come up with a laundry list of reasons why you wouldn't buy it, they can come up with zero because they're like, price, size, it's everything I want. It's got the streaming services already in there.
And they'll probably give you a free $30 DVD player just to get rid of it out of stock.
Right. And the other side of the coin is that DVD, every disc player that exists can still play DVDs.
Yeah.
You can stick your DVD into your Xbox Series X and it will play just fine.
Yep.
And as long as that's the case, there is not going to be a replacement of DVDs. Now, from the manufacturer standpoint, does it still make sense to put out a bunch of DVDs? I mean, they're saying no. There's a little bit of a revival of them right now, but the Blu-rays and the Ultra HD Blu-rays are going towards this more niche collectors.
Oh yeah, I mean, Ultra HD Blu-ray for sure is absolutely going to be a collector's item. I don't see that turning around and going any other direction. The Ultra HD Blu-ray is collectors, and I'm fine with that. I'm fine with it being like, it's going to be $40-$50. It's going to come in a fancier case. It's going to have some little booklets or pamphlets or whatever, collector's item or whatever, and that's how we're going to sell those things. And I'm fine with that. Honestly, I don't really have a beef with that. DVDs are going to carry on forever because they cost fractions of a penny to manufacture, and almost everything still comes out just on regular old DVD 480i resolution, and that's not going to stop for ages and ages. And so that's more or less where I think it's going. I mean, streaming is just we're heading back to what cable prices were. Whether there's no getting away from it. That's the amount that all of the studios believe they deserve for the content that they're putting out there. All the prices what we've been enjoying for multiple years up until now has strictly been about trying to get a subscription base. It was a loss leader. It was just trying to bring that number up. And now they're like, well, we got to start actually getting into the black with this, and that means prices are going up and incentives are getting in place that if you want better quality or whatever, you're going to have to pay more for it, and we're going to insert ads, and we're just back to cable. That's all it is.
So the reality across all industries right now, in the United States at least, is that the take-home pay of the top tier executives at all of these companies has inflated so much over the years.
Right.
I mean, I saw a spec the other day that I think something like over 450 times the normal pay of normal people or whatever it is.
Oh, it's got to be more than that.
In other countries, it's increased, 50 times, like at the worst. So the pay here in this country for these very top CEOs, the disparity is so immense that the cost of making the products hasn't really gone up all that much, but the money is just getting sucked into the coffers of the higher ups to the point where they're like, I don't want to give up any of my money, but that's where the extra money is going to come from because it cannot come from us. Like there's only so much that we can pay. So what are people doing? We cut cords because we're trying to save money, and now they're trying to raise the price on that. The only thing that we can do is now remove services because we can't afford them. So what has to happen in order for the content to be made at the same level of quality? Because like I said, I'm looking at this Indiana Jones movie like, who made this? Like, this looks like Xena Warrior Princess level of special effects as far as settings and backgrounds are concerned. I'm just like looking in the background going, this is awful. This does not look like it was set in another country. This was all filmed in LA, right in this one back lot. And I'm supposed to believe this? I mean, come on. Come on, guys. This is an Indiana Jones movie. Put some effort into it. But they're having to cut corners because they're still trying to pay these exorbitant, at least in my mind. That's where the money has to come from. And until it does, we're going to continue. They're going to continue to try to wring that blood from that stone that is our pocketbooks. Sasi is asking questions on behalf of a friend.
I believe it.
I bet. Yeah. This friend is currently designing a dedicated home theater in his basement. He's decided to go all KEF speakers. The room size is appropriate for the THX Ultra guidelines. So for overhead speakers, Sasi's friends figured he'll get KEF's THX Ultra certified in-ceiling speakers. Okay. Not only would they match the rest of the speakers in the room, they also have been praised by Matthew Pose from Audioholics and Audio Science Review as being in-ceiling speaker that actually, according to measurements, delivers the very wide, very even in all directions dispersion that Dolby calls for in their Dolby Atmos for home theater white paper. Sasi's friend intends to have 2 rows of seats, but stop at just 4 overhead speakers in the top front and top rear positions. Sasi vaguely recalls us saying to just aim in-ceiling speakers straight down as long as they have a very wide, very even dispersion. He seems to recall that we do not like independently aimable tweeters. Rob definitely doesn't. And
I do not.
I think they're a terrible idea because people use them.
Yes.
Does that also extend to not liking fully angled in-ceiling speaker designs? He could use a refresher on all of that. Yeah, we don't like that either, basically.
Well, I don't have a particular problem with fully angled in-ceiling speakers. But yeah, the independently aimable tweeter, I don't like that at all because you end up with very funky intermodulation distortion where the tweeter and the mid-range driver cross over when you start aiming them at different directions with the tweeter essentially embedded somewhere within the front face plane of the woofer, which is going to be the case with almost any in-ceiling speaker design. So I am not a fan of independently aimable tweeters, but fully angled in-ceiling speakers I don't have a big beef with. So those two things.
So the idea here, for those of you that aren't fully following what Rob's saying, is if a in-ceiling speaker, the aimable tweeter usually is mounted inside of the woofer. Yeah. Basically. Not always. Sometimes they're off, but it doesn't really make any difference. The waves that they come out of the tweeter and the waves that they come out of the woofer are interacting with each other in some form. So if you move the tweeter, you're changing how those waves interact in a way that is unpredictable to the original speaker design. They cannot basically put some sort of sensor in there that's I guess they could, but then the speaker would be way too expensive. Sensor that says this is the direction you're aiming it in relation to the woofer, and therefore I'm going to change the crossover in these ways in order to account for that difference. Instead, they're just like, well, I don't give a crap, aim it any way you want to do it, and I'll design the speaker either with the tweeter aimed in a very specific way, or aim straight down, which is normally what they do. So we are generally against that. Now, if the speaker itself is angled, then all of those concerns go away.
Yeah.
But I don't ever really think it's a great idea to have an aimed in-ceiling speaker because the idea of in-ceiling speakers, they're like, oh, well, this in-ceiling speaker has a more wide dispersion. Listen, all in-ceiling, there are no laser beam in-ceiling speakers.
Well, but I mean, some are more directional than others. Ones that have,
but only so much, and they're all going to be the same amount of you know what I mean? If they're the same distance from you and you're off axis to them, when you measure them, when Audyssey measures them, they're going to be like, okay, well, this speaker has got this performance characteristics. I'm going to EQ it to make it better.
But I mean, that can be a little bit of an issue because if you have the 2 rows of seats, one set of seats are essentially directly below one set of speakers or physically much closer to it at a much shallower angle than the other row. If you start trying to EQ the treble to account for off-axis dispersion, that can start to get uneven. So, I mean, just to address the entire overarching idea, Dolby in their own original white papers was like, yeah, you got in-ceiling speakers, just aim them straight down. Just make sure that they're wide, even dispersion. They disperse the sound evenly in all directions and plus minus 45 degrees at a minimum to either side. As long as they do that, just point them straight down. Because they're trying to mimic the same sound, more or less that you're getting in a full-size commercial movie theater where those speakers are way above you in a very tall ceiling. And even though people are like, look at the ceiling speakers in a movie theater and those are aimed slightly, it's like, yeah, they're so far up there that the sound is so diffuse by the time it hits the audience that's more or less what they're trying to mimic in-house. So they don't actually want like fully on-axis aiming of the in-ceiling speakers. They're like, no, we want to diffuse, you get a general sense of it's up and over that away. Is it's sort of in front of me, sort of to the left, or is it sort of behind me, sort of to the right? You just want a vague sense of direction, not really pinpoint laser light directional sound, above you. But I do agree that, Dolby in those white papers, it's like a single row of seats, right? So you can have this sort of even spacing of speakers. You can be within the 45-degree dispersion cone of the speaker. Once you have more than one row of seats, I don't have a big problem with, trying to keep all of the seats within the cone of dispersion of the speaker, which even with a wide plus minus 45-degree speaker could mean some angling of that ceiling speaker to have both the front row and the back row, both the left seats and the right seats, all within the cone of dispersion of the speaker. And that is going to help your, room correction setup by not having, drastically different sound, where it's attempting to boost the treble of the top rear speakers from the front row seat positions to the point that it becomes, screechingly loud when you're sitting in the rear row of seats. We don't want it to overcompensate that way. So some angling of the in-ceiling speakers does make sense to me, just to keep within the cone of dispersion, but not like direct aiming at a particular seat.
Yeah. My problem with the angled speakers just in general is that it now has limited to a certain extent how you can configure your room, or where, in what ways you can configure a room. There are, we just had somebody on the podcast who's like, I built my riser into my room, and now I want to move it back like 3 inches or 4 inches or something. And I can't do it anymore. Yeah. But with this configuration, right, where you have got these angled speakers, now when you move around the room, you can move forward and back a little bit.
Yeah, ones that are built with a fixed angle in those speakers, or ones that are angled because they have a narrower dispersion tweeter, like a folded ribbon tweeter, that's taller than it is wide, and they built in that angle because it doesn't have even 45-degree to either side dispersion. I think you're asking for more problems than you're solving there. So I'll get you to read the next part because I have a suggestion specifically.
Okay, but more to the point, Sasi's friend spoke with his dealer. First of all, I'm starting to think these dealers, guys, have way too much emotional influence over their clients. And they warned him away from Kef's in-ceiling speakers. They didn't like that they are not angled, and they wanted Sasi's friend to go with angled in-ceiling speakers that they sell instead, saying that they easily beat Kef for Atmos.
That's just bunk. The Kef speakers are a really good design, really good speakers, and very, about the most even dispersion, which is exactly why Matthew Poe's liked them so much. He's like, this is what Dolby wanted your Atmos speakers to be. Yes. But with the caveat that, if you don't have tall ceiling height, like the taller your ceiling is, the easier it is to just have them fire straight down.
Yes.
Because you're going to be within that 45 plus minus,
and we don't know anything about this room. He doesn't give us any dimensions.
Angle. Yeah, if you have a lower ceiling and multiple rows of seats, then, just angling them enough to be within the cone of dispersion is going to be beneficial.
Yeah. So Sasi's friend doesn't want to create any bad blood with this dealer. That you pay this man or person.
Yeah. Well, you pay them. Sentence, Tom.
But he's also willing to work with someone else if they aren't the right fit for his project. So we'd like to hear from us what we think about all this. We often advocate for the cheapest option for Atmos speakers. Okay?
Yeah, that's at least competent. Yeah.
Yes, you just got to get something that is good enough to be up there because, and I wrote this article on Sunday. I haven't published it yet, but. So in my home theater, you guys heard me talk about it here. My amp went out, right? Which Greg was great to replace. My amp went out and I turned it off because it was clicking and it was driving me bonkers, right? At the same time, I had switched from a 5.1 from a 7.1 to a 5.1, and then back to a 7.1 configuration. And with the when I was in 5.1, remember I talked about on the podcast, I was like, I might be missing something back there. Sure. I might be. I don't really know, but my brain is telling me that I think you're missing something back there, because there's speakers back there that are not playing. Right? Even though I think that if you sat me down and A/B'd it, if you were able to just quickly switch between the two, I don't know that I would have been able to pick out the difference that readily. I probably could have, but not that readily. It wouldn't be like this massive difference, right? Whereas when I switched off the amp and got rid of my top middles, remember I have top front heights and top middles. Yeah, I got rid of the top middles. At no point did I even psychologically think I'm missing something above me. Like, it never sounded that way to me in my room. And with the switching from 5.1 to 7.1, I changed my speaker configuration so that I did not lose any sounds. Anything that would have been going to the surround backs went into the surrounds. So it had the best chance of recreating surround back information because it was still in the room somewhere. It was still being created by the speaker. With the amp going out, I switched it off, didn't change my speaker configuration. So those sounds were lost. Yeah. They were missing. And I still never thought that I was missing my top my top middle speakers. So to say that we need to go out there and spend a ton of money on really good quality Atmos speakers and that anything can easily beat anything else for Atmos, I don't think that literally nothing, comparing nothing to a speaker, easily beats each other. I mean, sure. I think that it's basically, yes, there's a difference. Yes, there's a difference. And if I had watched maybe A Quiet Place or one of those movies that really uses the overhead stuff, I might have gone, something seems to be missing in this room. But I was watching like normal movies. I was watching things. I was watching Ahsoka that was in Atmos or has Atmos content there at least, and if it wasn't, then it was being upmixed anyways. And I was watching movies, I was watching things that should have watched Barbie, which would definitely had an Atmos soundtrack, and I had never noticed it. So definitely tread lightly here as far as worrying about how good a quality speaker you need to have over your head. You need to have a speaker that will play the sounds in a good enough way that you're not worried about it like distorting, cracking, and being so off axis that it sounds weird. As long as it sounds marginally okay, it's more than enough as far as I'm concerned.
2 recommendations for you, and it's a little bit dependent because we don't know the ceiling height of your friend's dedicated theater that's being built. So first of all, I would probably bid adieu to this dealer. I wouldn't be working with them anymore because somebody's going to be that insistent on something like this. It just seems a bit weird. I don't know why they're quite that invested when a customer has come to them and told them what they want. So if your friend has quite high ceiling height, and he likes these KEF in-ceiling speakers and the rest of the speakers are KEF and he just wants everything to match, then I would go ahead and get them. Because if you have a decent ceiling height, and I'm talking in this case with the 2 rows of seats, I'm actually talking greater than a 10-foot ceiling height. So if you're something an 11 or 12-foot ceiling height, that type of range, then I would get these KEF in-ceiling speakers if those are the ones that your friend likes and not worry one iota about it. If the ceiling height is lower, if we're talking about sort of a standard 8-foot ceiling height, personally, I want to be able to have those ceilings aimed somewhat so that all the seats are within the cone of dispersion and you don't run into any of those overcompensating problems that room correction might apply during the EQ process. But I want ones where I can adjust the angle, that it isn't a fixed angle of speaker. And I'm not just talking about being able to rotate it. I'm talking about the actual angling of the speakers themselves. And I want the woofer and the tweeter to move together. I don't want independent tweeter movement and then the woofer is fixed. So I would recommend to you Sonance. And if you're in a room size that is actual like THX Ultra specification, then probably the larger of the 2 Sonance Mag series models, the Mag 8 rather than the Mag 6. Love those Mag 6. For most setups, small to medium-sized rooms, I'd be getting the Mag 6. But the Mag 8 has the higher output capabilities. It can match those THX Ultra speakers for the output capabilities. And if you get the Mag 8, what I like about the Sonance Mag 8 in-ceiling speaker is that you can move the woofer and the tweeter together, which makes makes much more sense than only moving the tweeter independently, but that gives you the ability to adjust that cone of dispersion to evenly distribute across all of the seats, and that's what I would recommend that you get. So Sonance Mag 8 is where I would point you.
So let's just talk about for a second here in general how our advice and what we talk about in this podcast and dealers are different, how we differ.
Do we have time to talk about that, Todd?
We do. We're going to talk about it because I'm going to. So with dealers, there's a couple of things. And I want to stress this. I rarely think that people are malicious or nefarious.
Sure.
Okay. I do not think that dealers are out there, rubbing their hands together and trying to trick you into buying things that are not good because it makes them a lot of money. I do not think that. I think that they have their experience with things that they have learned and they have installed and customer feedback.
Had feedback about, sure, yeah.
Yeah. And then we have a different set of experience and a different point of view, if you will. And the thing about dealers is that, they are inundated from manufacturers with information about the products that they are releasing, that they sell. And then they try them out and they install them, and the customer comes back with whatever feedback they have, which is usually very positive, because you normally go from, I don't have a theater room, to I have a full theater room, and it sounds amazing, because
sure.
Before, in comparison to what it sounded like before, it is much better. It's like when we're talking about the guy before.
Many other products that could have gone in there of equivalent or higher or lower prices, and the end result happiness would
still
have been
be
the same.
better than TV speakers.
Oh, definitely.
Okay, it still would have been better. So these guys are like, the angled speakers, we get so much more positive feedback than we do about the ones that go straight down. Now, that's true. I believe that to be true.
Could be.
I also believe it to be psychologically motivated, that people knowing that they have angled speakers in there are like, oh my God, the angle makes such a difference. I mean, I've got people on bikes that tell me all the time, who are like, oh, I started waxing my chain. It's a game changer. No, it's not. It is not a game changer. You were 0% faster. I know how fast you are. You're not any faster. You're not. It's not a game changer. You just spent all this time and effort doing a thing, and now you have to psychologically justify it. So, them giving you this feedback, I don't necessarily think they're trying to trick you or your friend into doing anything. I think this is their honest, experience, and that they want to make sure you're getting the best that. At the end of this, they're going to get a good review, and they do that by giving you what they have experience with as being good stuff. So they're going to be apprehensive and probably won't warranty anything that you say, I want this instead of one of the things you sell. They're going to be like, we'll put it in there, but we can't warranty it. And if you don't like the way it sounds, that's your fault. Yeah. And that's because they have to protect themselves at the same time. So, or they may just flat out refuse to do it, which I think is fair, because they don't want you to give them a bad review because you insisted, oh, I want to use this other speaker that Tom and Rob said would be good. And then they install it and you don't like it, and then they get a bad review. And
of course, a lot of people, when they install overhead speakers for the first time, they want to notice them. Yes. Which you're not really meant to. They're atmospheric. It's supposed to be more enveloping, not necessarily, oh, I really notice that there's sound above me now. It's supposed to just be a general three-dimensional soundscape type of experience more than it is supposed to be really noticing it. But people want to notice it, so maybe you goose those trim levels a bit, and maybe you aim those speakers right at the person's head so that when something plays from overhead, they notice it. It's much more pronounced. More than it was really intended to be, but the person's happy because they're like, yep, I paid for speakers to go on my ceiling, and now I can hear that there are speakers in my ceiling.
Yeah. So, don't necessarily hate on the dealer for being a dealer. That's kind of, they're not trying to trick you. They want to make sure they get a good review at the end of this thing. And this is how they know how. So this next question is from two people, Andy and Anand.
Well, no, AKA. It was.
Oh, AKA. Sorry.
Yes. Anand, Andy, because we talked about him last week, but he's like, I just go by Andy. So there we go.
Oh, well, I would rather say his name properly, but maybe I'm not, and that's why he wants to
I
Andy.
don't think any of us ever have, so he's like, just call me Andy. It'll be easier for everyone around.
I really want you to give me the pronunciation so I can say it right. It bothers
Record
me.
yourself saying it. You must have a phone. Just send us that little soundbite.
That's right. Or you can call the offline rant line.
Sure.
Which is still, I think it's still working. Every once in a while,
no idea.
Makes me do you think? Anyways, about 6 months ago, Anand or Annie wrote us to get some advice about upgrades for his theater. Wound up going from a Denon X3300H to a X3800H, which allowed him to expand his previous 5.1.2 configuration to a 5.2.4 setup. We'll notice he added a second sub, an SVS PC2000 Pro cylinder, one of us. And he upgraded from his TV from a 65-inch C7 OLED to a 77-inch G3 with micro lens array, which makes Andy and Rob twins.
That's right. We've got the same TV.
He's very happy with all his upgrades, so we didn't steer him wrong. He decided to try what seemed like the simplest setup procedure for his dual subs, which was to go ahead and configure his new Denon for 2 subs and let sub EQ HT do its thing during Audyssey. Thankfully, he followed our advice and put the 2 subs across the room from each other. It seems to have worked out without him having to resort to Rob's arduous 12-step guide. He was pleasantly surprised when, even though he didn't change any of his floor-level speakers, everything sounded cleaner and clearer now, especially from his center channel. So it's all good.
Didn't we have a mention about what happens when you remove the masking effects of suboptimal bass setup?
Going from 1 sub to 2, more even bass. It's not muddy anymore, and everything sounds clearer.
Placed across the room.
The room.
Yeah, and all of a sudden things are clearer, cleaner. Center speaker sounds better, even though nothing changed in that as far as his floor level speaker setup.
Very strange.
Yeah,
it's almost like we know what we're talking about.
Could be. Once in a while we get it right.
Hey, we give enough advice, some of it's going to work out.
Some of it's going to be right.
And the rest of the people are on Reddit right now complaining about us. So it's all good news. Where did I stop? I guess. So it's all good news, and he just wanted to ask about a feature in his Denon X3800H they came across when looking through all the available settings after having run Audyssey. There's an option to turn on low frequency containment. It can be off by default or set to levels 1 through 7, with 4 being default when you first turn LFC on. When he looked up what it was, the description says it will prevent bass and vibrations from being conveyed to your neighbors, and to use a higher setting if your neighbors are close. Can we explain what it actually does? Is it for real, or is it just marketing mumbo-jumbo? He would like to be able to play his movies loud without bothering his neighbors, so he tried turning it on and leaving it at the setting level of 4, but he wasn't sure just by listening what it was actually doing and what would prevent the bass from bothering his neighbors. It is a low-pass filter. No, a high-pass filter.
No. I mean, it just turns the bass down.
Yeah,
just linearly. It's not even.
Oh, I thought it basically cut off the low stuff.
No, it's not a roll off. It just turns your subwoofer down. that's all it does. It just turns it down.
It's been a while since we talked about this.
Yeah. No, people have measured this, including not even just measuring like the subwoofer output, but measuring the pre-out output, measuring that RCA jack, exactly what is happening to the signal and nothing else. And so if we're looking at the graph that's been provided, somebody over at AVS Forum did that very thing. So we've got the drawn line, which was like the target, which is, the default target in the bass for Audyssey is pretty much just a flat response. They aren't targeting a bass rise or anything like that by default. The setting with low frequency containment off, the red trace there, and that is including this person's Audyssey EQ correction. So this one is saying, okay, I need to, turn down some frequencies and turn up some frequencies. But the volume level of that red trace is pretty much superimposed on the original default target. And then the various levels, his was an older Denon receiver that only had 4 levels of low frequency containment that you could choose from. But as soon as he turned it on and set it to level 1, it just dropped the bass uniformly across the board by 15 decibels, and then basically by an additional 4 decibels for every additional level. Now that they have levels 1 through 7, it's a little bit more granular, and that first level 1, doesn't drop it quite as much as 15 decibels anymore, but it is just a uniform turning down of the bass output. That's all low frequency containment is. So it is in that sense marketing mumbo jumbo. It isn't doing anything special that magically makes the bass be in your room but not bother your neighbors anymore. It just turns down the volume of your subwoofer. That's all it does.
So what I suggested in my article about blocking sound from your bothering your neighbors is if the thing to do. at those times is to turn on Audyssey Dynamic Volume or whatever they call it.
Dynamic EQ.
EQ.
Get the terminology right, since somebody else had that wrong before.
No. Turn it on the volume one. Right.
The volume one, the dynamic range compression that makes loud sounds quieter and quiet sounds a little louder. Okay.
That's right. So you're going to turn that on so that everything is now a uniform sound.
Yeah, pretty close to
volume.
Yeah.
So that when you turn the volume up, you know that you're not, when you set the volume, you know that you're not going to get overly loud sections and overly
there's
soft
not going to be
sections.
big bursting explosions
so
that
now
are
that you've
way,
got
way louder.
You've got the Audyssey volume on.
Okay.
Then you turn on the LFC, which then turns down the bass.
Turns down the bass, yeah.
So that will, I think, gives you the best chance, if you've got Audyssey, the best chance of not bothering your neighbor. So you turn on the dime. Yeah. So that way you won't get these, like, when the explosion happens. Yeah. It will not be, the dynamic range will be compressed. So you will not have a very, very, like, if you're listening to people whispering right before that, all of a sudden it's a huge explosion. It will not. It won't send you running for the remote and having your neighbors complain about
But the main thing of transmitting bass frequencies to your attached neighbors is the physical vibrations that make their way from the subwoofer into the structure of your building.
Which you should have already done if you listened to us.
I mean, he got PC2000 Pro that came with the subwoofer isolation feet, so that one is damped from the surface that subwoofer is standing on. I don't know what your first subwoofer was, or if it had isolation feet or a platform or something squishy underneath your first subwoofer. If it doesn't, do that, because definitely a big part of not bothering your neighbors is physically decoupling the vibrating thing, the subwoofer, from the structure of your building. That is going to help much, much more than any sort of equalization could. But yeah, low frequency containment, it's not magic. It's not doing anything particularly special. It's a uniform lowering of the bass output. That's all it is.
Yeah. Infinite Gary. So, what time is it? Oh, we're going to go Gary. Infinite Gary. Gary is trying to reconcile SVS's claim that there are 3 new Ultra Evolution floor-standing models, Pinnacle, Titan, and Tower, have been designed in such a way that it's okay to put them right against a wall. With what he has long believed to be a basic truth based on something reps from both Revel and Harman told him years ago, that floor-standing speakers should be a minimum of 18 inches away from the wall, and even farther away is better if you have the space available. Let's just believe the dude who made the speaker before you believe something that somebody told you years ago. I mean, I think that's just it. The guy who made the speaker probably put it against the wall and measured it and went, yeah, that's fine. That's exactly how I wanted it to be. That's what I wanted it to be. Pulled it out, went, yeah, that's fine too. That's exactly the way I wanted it to be. So that's the answer to the question, but let's go. Gary wrote to SVS, and Smith Friedman, their chief speaker designer, replied directly saying that, yes, indeed, all 3 new Ultra Evolution floor-standing models can be pushed right up against the wall because the rear-facing drivers and ports are all on angled surfaces, which gives them enough room to breathe. But Gary's again, that's the guy. Just listen to him. Gary's understanding that with a prescribed distance away from the wall wasn't strictly about breathing room for the rear port. Surely you don't need a minimum of 18 inches of space just for that, right? So how do we make this make sense? Okay. The other people were saying that this is a rule of thumb that we use with all of our speakers and you should use with all of the other speakers out there. And then SVS is saying, but with our speaker, you don't have to because we have designed it in such a way so that it is not necessary. I don't understand how a general rule of thumb and one particular instance being different is at all confusing to you. One is a rule of thumb. One is, this is how you, like, a rule of thumb is, I stop at all stop signs. That's a rule of thumb. That's actually a rule, but that's a rule of thumb. That's a law. Yeah. But, I actually don't know where I'm going with that one, so let's just stop.
Yeah, that's probably not a good analogy.
That's not a good analogy. Let me think about this. Off the top of the dome did not go well that one.
No, I'm a little more forgiving of this because what's changed a bit is more recently there is a change in approach to how we deal with that front wall speaker boundary reinforcement, the interference that comes from particularly in longer wavelengths, bass wavelengths. You're going to have sound that is going backward from the speaker, reflecting off of that front wall that is behind the speaker. And then just strictly because of distance and time, there's going to be the reflected sound coming off of that front wall, meeting up with the sound waves that are emanating out of the front of the speaker. And just based on distance, you're going to have sound wave cancellations from that front wall reflection meeting up with the sound now being produced by the front of the speaker. And like, you can just mathematically work out where those cancellations are going to happen based on that distance. Now, what happens is when you move the speaker closer and closer to being right up against that front wall, you raise the frequency at which that cancellation starts to happen. And the farther away you pull the speaker from the wall, the lower that frequency is going to be. So, I mean, that's just wavelength. That's just the distance from the front of the speaker to the wall gets shorter wavelength, higher frequency. The distance gets farther, greater distance, lower frequency. That's all that's going on there. Basically, if you set up the speaker so that you have now created the worst interference from that reflected sound meeting up with the sound coming out the front of the speaker, happening in a range that we can't mitigate in some way, then you're going to have problems with the bass coming from that particular speaker. And so there's sort of a no man's land right in the middle range, because if you pull the speaker far enough away from the wall, you're going to lower that problematic frequency down into the crossover or subwoofer region. So we can mitigate it by just having a low-end roll-off on the speaker, and now we're not really dealing with too many problems from that, and we fill in that bass with our subwoofers, and we adjust the crossover point correctly, and we've mitigated it that way. If we push the speaker quite close to the wall, well, then we've raised the frequency high enough that we can treat that front wall reflection with standard absorption panels. They don't have to be, crazy thicknesses. We can do it with a 4-inch or a 6-inch panel and mitigate things that way. It's when we're in the no man's land in between those two things, where you'd either need really thick absorption panels that are unwieldy and too expensive, or it's not low enough to get into the subwoofer crossover range. I would actually say, 18 inches from a wall is within that no man's land. I don't really like that recommendation. I'd want to have a distance from the front of the speaker to the wall of about 3 feet or more. So, I mean, that could be, 2 feet from the back of the speaker to the wall, because the speaker has a depth to it. So we're talking about the front baffle of the speaker to the wall. I want about 3 feet or more, because that gets it low enough that I can mitigate things with the crossover. Or I want it almost as close to the wall as I can get it with absorption panels behind the speaker. So we've updated the way that we think about that a bit, and that's more or less where they're coming from. So SVS, Smith didn't mention in his email reply, oh yeah, you should have absorption on your front wall there, because that's what's really going to allow you to put that speaker right up against the front wall without any sort of problems. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it myself without having at least some absorption on the front wall, pushing them right back against it.
All right, we'll do one more, because Dan's question is stupid long.
He's got many. Yes, there was no way we were going to get to that unless we had to sped up much more before. But yeah, we can get the last question in here, and that'll be it.
No, we'll do Dan's question. We're just going to get it done. We're going to get
This is going to be a very long podcast then. All right,
no, we're going to go fast. With the release of SVS's new Ultra Evolution Series speakers and all of the marketing material from SVS along with them, they are leaning pretty heavily into their whole acoustically centered time alignment curved front baffles. And Tom and Rom seem to have poo-pooed that, but he doesn't. But he takes it we don't consider time aligning the drivers to be important. But of course, SVS isn't the only speaker company out there to advocate for and market time-aligned driver design. So can we delve deeper into the subject to explain what is time alignment of the driver supposed to do, and why do we not buy into it? We have discussed this. So the idea is that the voice coils inside the drivers are all in the same plane.
They're vertically aligned, straight line through all the voice coils going from bottom to top.
Yeah, and the idea is that therefore all the stupid waves are going to come out at the same
sure
whatever,
and that's all of those drivers were playing the same frequency at the same time, then they should all arrive at a flat vertical plane when they hit your face.
Yeah. Which is that's not how the world works. That's not how anything works. So right. And any problems that you could run into from having drivers have their voice coils not physically aligned are easily correctable through a myriad of ways, including crossovers, through waveguides, through all these other things. So Yeah, sure. You have physically time-aligned the voice coils, or physically aligned the voice coils, and therefore whatever. I mean, it still doesn't address the fact that the cone material is not the same distance from the voice coils as the rest of it. Like some are deeper than others and everything else. So, whatever. I mean, it's whatever. It's like saying, "Oh, I've got Ferrari red paint on my car, therefore it's a Ferrari. It's faster or something."
So
I
don't think it really delve a little deeper on this. So I mean, look, this would only have an impact in the crossover regions between speakers that are playing the same frequencies for some portion, right?
Right.
So the steeper we make those crossovers, the less this has any possibility of having any sort of impact. But I suppose if you had very low, crossover slopes between, then there's going to be a broader frequency range where the mid-range driver and the tweeter are both playing the same frequencies, and maybe we start caring about phase coherence or something like that. But I mean, more to the point that I'm thinking of, this could only work with these angled drivers, supposedly aiming everything so that it all arrives at your ear at the same time. What if you slouch? Or what if you recline your seat?
What if you cock your head to one side? And your one ear is a little closer to one driver than the other?
You just got physically closer to those lower drivers when you reclined your seat, versus the drivers at the top of the speaker. So I mean, are we holding our head in a vice vertically and horizontally and angle-wise?
How many times on this podcast should we discuss things that are measurable but not subjectively experienceable? This is a academic to us, and I think to anybody who's reasonable about this. This is an academic difference. They are just like,
it's just
mathematically this makes a difference, but in the real world, there's so many more variables out there. Like,
intuitively, it sounds good, which is why it makes for good marketing. Look, Focal, one of my favorite speaker companies, they have these curved front faces on Focal speakers, and they talk about it being for, phase alignment and that too. But then they also sell speakers with a flat face, and they don't claim that you can't play them together. Like it's nothing like that. We've talked about AES, the Audio Engineering Society. They have studied phase coherence as one of the things, and in double-blind listening tests, it never did any harm. Like nobody ever said when you phase aligned these drivers versus not phase aligning these drivers that the phase aligned was somehow worse than the non-phase aligned. That wasn't the case. Did no harm. Also provided no benefit. Essentially, nobody could ever tell them apart. It was an absolute coin flip, or it could not detect any difference whatsoever. It completely makes sense because we aren't hearing only direct sound. Even in the treble, we're not hearing only direct sound. We are also hearing reflected sound. So are you in a sphere? Are you in the middle of that sphere? Because if you're not, you're having different time. Different frequencies are arriving at different times at your ears. Also, we aren't playing all frequencies simultaneously.
Right.
That wouldn't be music. That would just be white noise. So there's so many reasons why this doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that you have the drivers, physically aligned, because they aren't playing all the same thing at the same time. You're getting reflections off the surfaces of your rooms at different times. You are your head is not equidistant from every single driver all of the time. So it doesn't matter if they're off by a couple of inches. It's not going to make the difference. So that's my deep dive on that.
So last week we dug into the minutiae of the differences between the Onkyo Pioneer Elite and Integra flagship receiver models. The Pioneer is $200 more than the Onkyo, and the Integra is $200 more than the Pioneer, so it isn't a huge price difference. The Integra had the most features and inputs, while the Onkyo had the fewest, so that's price points seem to track, and he simply likes the looks of the Pioneer Elite in the middle the best. So, but we also mentioned Denon and Marantz offhandedly. He actually owns 4 AV receivers at the moment, which is far too many, I think. A Denon and Marantz, a Sony ES, and Integra, so it's not as though he is loyal to one specific brand. He's trying to decide which flagship or near flagship receiver model justifies its price tag best. He was also keen to try out DRAX, since he's already been able to compare Audyssey Accu EQ and Sony's Auto EQ program, which sucks. He could afford to get the Denon's X6800H, but Marantz recently released their Cinema 30, a price $1,000 higher, but seemingly with identical feature set, what warrants the price difference. The aesthetics?
I mean, it's primarily just the brand difference. Yeah. Now, people will point out, like that Marantz Cinema 30, manufactured in Japan. I don't know if the X6800H is. I believe the X6800H is also manufactured in Japan. But objectively speaking, they use different power supplies. The Cinema 30 does have a toroidal power supply. It's an EI power supply in the X6800H. They do have different DAC chips. And the Marantz has DAC chips that cost a bit more.
Inaudible.
Well, actually, I wanted to mention a fun thing with the Cinema 30. This only applies to the Marantz Cinema 30 and their AV1 15-channel Pre-Pro. But in those models only, they now have a setting in the menu that Marantz didn't used to have. And they label it under the DAC. They're like, this is a DAC setting. And they're like, you can either choose the Marantz default DAC tuning or, like, I think they just put it 1 and 2. Like, and in the description in the manual, they're like, setting 2 is for when you're measuring it. If you want it to measure it the best, put it in setting 2. But we tune it for setting 1. That's the Marantz tuning. Well, Gene over at Audioholics, he measured it, and setting 1, the Marantz tuning, it's just a high-frequency roll-off. It's starting at 8 kilohertz, it rolls off the highs a little bit. Whereas setting 2 is ruler flat, just like the Denon is. He's like, that's the one you want to use, because now you aren't applying an EQ to the signal at the DAC part of this, which is really, really dumb. But now we know what's so amazingly different about Marantz tuning versus Denon tuning. It's a high-frequency roll-off, which is dumb. So, yeah, I don't have any justification other than pure aesthetics. If you like the front plate of the Marantz better, and that's worth $1,000 to you, okay, I don't have any beef with that. It's your money, and if those aesthetics are worth that to you, I can say it. But I care much more about the feature set. The differences, like the EI transformers that Denon is using in their high-end receivers, are like marvels of engineering. The way that those EI transformers measure is like, it's stellar. It's really, really good stuff. So I would absolutely save the $1,000 unless that faceplate is worth $1,000 to you.
So he wasn't really planning on going beyond 11 speaker setup. So if he just looks at the models in Denon's lineup at the top of the 11 speakers, that says 3800H or the 4800H, we always seem to say that people should get the 3800H. And if they would actually benefit from more amplifier power, use the price difference to add some external amplification rather than spending the extra on the 4800H. So what justifies the 4800H even being in Denon's lineup? In the end, overall, what do we think you should get as a new receiver? So what justifies the 4800H?
Because well, it does have some feature additions that the 3800H doesn't have.
But on top of that,
from just a little bit more power.
Go ahead and what you're doing is you're saying, these are the features I care about. Yeah. And these two receivers basically do the same thing for those features that I care about. Why would I even consider the 4800H? And the answer is you shouldn't. You shouldn't. That's why we keep telling people to buy the 3800H.
That's right.
But there are reasons to buy the 4800H because there are additional features that are there, but you don't care about them. It's like, you know, when you're on a plane and like, it doesn't matter how many first class seats there are in that plane because you're not sitting in any of them. You're going to be back in coach, right? With me. So having those extra features on that plane doesn't help you, so you don't consider it. And when you consider which airline you go with, you're not looking at, well, this airline has more first class seats because you're not sitting in them, so you don't care. It's the same thing here. Yeah,
the 4800H has some analog video inputs. 3800H has 0 analog video inputs. That could be a reason some people would get the 4800H over the 3800H, as they still have some analog video sources that they want to plug in. The 4800H has 3 zones, and you can power all 3 of those zones from the AV receiver itself. 3800H has 2 zones, and you have to steal some power in order to power zone 2. So those are basically it. The 4800H has more triggers. It has 1 more HDMI input. You know, so I mean, it's minor feature differences, but that could be the thing that makes somebody go, oh, I need to get the 4800H instead of the 3800H because I have that specific need, so I don't mind it being in the lineup whatsoever. But I would not get it for the extra rated 20 watts per channel of amplifier power. To me, the price difference doesn't make sense to do it for that reason, because you could take that same price difference and get a much larger difference in wattage from adding external amplification to the 3800H. And the 3800H is an excellent pre-pro, and it gives you the ability to individually turn off built-in amplifier channels for the cleanest pre-out signal that it can provide, channel by channel. It's not all or nothing anymore. So there's really little incentive in my mind, other than, yeah, you're going to have one more piece of equipment in your stack of equipment to add the external amplification. But if the 3800H has all the features that you need, and yeah, that would be the one I would point most people to. Now, all of that said, which receiver do I think Dan should get? And I think you should get that Pioneer Elite, because it's the one you like the looks of the best.
I know, right?
Simple enough. You like the looks the best. In this instance, that's enough reason in my mind, because there isn't a big enough price delta. You like the looks of the Pioneer Elite the best. All of these have the features that you need. You don't need to buy a receiver that can go to 13 speakers if you're stopping at 11. So get that one. It also comes with Dirac Live. You don't have to pay any extra. You could pay extra and add Dirac Live to the 3800H, so it's not that you can't get Dirac if you went with the Denon. But you're like, I'm curious to try Dirac. It already comes with the Pioneer Elite. It's the right price. It's the right features. I like the way it looks the best. Get that one. Yeah.
So we did this experiment of adding an external 2-channel amp to his Marantz receiver, which was powering his speaker setup in his living room all on its own before. We said his methodology was flawed and that he shouldn't draw any conclusions because he didn't rerun Audyssey, and he just matched the trim levels by ear. As a reminder, he's only 10 feet away from his speakers, but the room is wide open to basically the entire house. Yeah. So we went back and remeasured things, and it turns out we were right about there being a difference in levels. With the external amp in place, his front, left, and right speakers were 2 dB louder than before, which is noticeable.
Which is hard to detect when you're level matching by ear, but enough that double-blind listening tests show a clear preference for the 2 decibel louder speakers. That is repeated over and over in listening tests.
I've had many people claim, professional reviewers, I've had many people claim that they can level match by ear. I've many people claim that.
Well, and
I've had one person, well, they can do it, not accurately. They claim they can do it accurately. Yeah. I've had one person try to prove it to me. And let's just say they stopped making that claim after that. Or at least they stopped making it to me. Yeah. Because it definitely didn't work out. So he evened everything out, and he would swear he still hears a difference between the Marantz powering everything by itself versus the 2-channel amp powering the front, left, and right, while his Marantz powers the center, surrounds, and top middle. So he thinks the front, left, and right still sound more dynamic, but more than that, the other 5 speakers all seem to have a breath of fresh air to them, like they have more power too. He decided to swap out the Marantz for his Integra, and he believes he heard the same sort of difference. But when he swapped in his Sony ES receiver, he didn't think he'd hear any difference at all. It sounded exactly the same whether Sony powered all 7 speakers or the external 2-channel amp was added, and the Sony only powered 5 speakers. The Sony ES receiver is much, much heavier than his other receivers, and on paper, it has the most power and the biggest power supply. So it's as simple as that. More power equals more better in his setup. But once he has just enough, which the Sony appears to be able to muster, then no audible difference after that. I don't want to say the things I'm thinking, so I don't want to say it.
Okay.
I don't. I just don't. I don't want to get into this, honestly, because there are so many ways that we can convince ourselves of things
on that side.
And I have no way of saying definitively one way or the other whether or not the difference being heard in any test, much less this one, is real or imagined. So I will say this. If you are sitting there doing a comparison between 2 different things and you're like, I think I hear a difference. I think there might be a difference here. This sounds a little bit better. If it's a little bit better, it's 0 better. Okay. Most of the time, if it's a little bit better, it's 0 better. And that is because that little bit is just your brain. Okay. If it were
this
really
is all cited, he knows beforehand what he's listening to. There's no blind structure going on here.
Right. If you were really in a cited test like this, the differences cannot be little. They must be big for you to definitively make a conclusion one way or the other. And when I say big, I mean like that is a Honda and this is a bus. Those are two different things that I can definitely tell the difference of, whether I've got my eyes closed, my eyes open, whether I'm driving it or just sitting in it, or if it's next to me running or not next to me, or I feel the tire with I can tell the difference. It's big. That is what you need to have for a sighted test. The reason why we have blind tests is so that when we think we hear or we think we experienced a small difference, we know whether or not we're actually experiencing it.
Sure.
And we do that by being able to pick out that difference consistently to a significant, a statistically significant degree. Right. So,
or was it placebo?
When we are doing these little A/B things in this room, like people are like, oh, I got this, new power cord and now my TV looks better. When I went from a projector to an OLED, nobody in my house went, I think it looks the same. Nobody said that because the difference was significant. It was so significant that you could pick it out from a distance. Doesn't make any difference who you are. You don't have to have any special training. It's there. No. That is a sighted test that will show you a significant difference.
Or
if you are having a small difference with a sighted test, then chances are the differences are either so slight as to be not replicatable. You might be the only one noticing it, or are just not there.
Yeah, that is the most likely thing that's going on here. I absolutely agree with that. I will just say though, in a completely open room, all the cubic feet, right? There is that crossover region that we mentioned earlier in this very same episode, where there. Even though you're only 10 feet away, then the treble, I'm not expecting to hear any difference, okay? Other than potential masking effects, right? If you start distorting the bass, then that can produce a masking effect that you might think is coming from the treble, even though the treble output itself stayed the same. But it's that sort of thing where it's not out of the realm of possibility that due to the sheer volume of air that you're dealing with, having just 3 decibels more output, an amplifier that provides twice the wattage, genuinely so, without distorting as it does so, and gives you 3 decibels more output at 125 hertz. This is not out of the realm of possibility in your setup. That could be happening for real, and that could be audible. That could be detectable in a blind comparison. You might be able to hear that difference. So I'm not going to say there's no objective chance of there being a difference here. No different from our answers in the previous episodes when we talked to Dan about this subject. But yeah, that could be what's going on here.
Yeah. Everybody else was talking about Bo in his 10,000 cubic foot listening room, so Dan wanted to join the party. We talked about how it would be possible to achieve the same subwoofer performance as the JL Audio Gotham subs for less money until he gets that, but Dan would like to come at it from another direction. What is the argument and justification for spending significantly more and getting the JL Audio Gotham subs? You don't know about the other things?
Okay.
That could be one reason.
Sure.
You like JL Audio as a company and want to support them.
Sure.
You like the looks of the subs, or the
that would be a
footprint
big
of
one.
the subs, or some feature of the subs better than you like the other ones, or money just doesn't matter to you, and that's the easiest sub to get. It'll get there faster.
As we talked about regarding Bo last episode, wanting to maintain that dealer relationship, and JL Audio is a brand that they sell.
I just don't like anybody enough to spend a bunch of extra money just because I want to maintain their friendship. But that's just me.
But, could there, what are the arguments for that I'm going to throw into the ring, along with the other things Tom mentioned that I all agree with? So look, if there were a pair of JL Audio Gotham subs, and they were the exact same price as a pair of, if it's all about output, then like JTR's Captivator 4000 ULF can output more bass and deeper, right down to 20 hertz and even below, even though I don't care about that, but it can output more than the JL Audio Gotham. So if it's purely objective output based, then I might still choose the JTRs. But let's say the smaller model, the 2400, which has about equal output to those JL Audio Gothams. And if those were exactly the same price presented to me, I would choose the JL Audio Gothams in that lineup because I think they look nicer. So that could be a justification. Now, I wouldn't pay the price delta that exists, buying them brand new, but that's me. So someone
maybe
might
they're
say
on sale. Not on sale. Maybe they're used. Sure. That's another reason to get them.
But, someone could say the price delta is fine by me. It wouldn't be Rob's choice, but for someone else, they're perfectly fine with it for the looks. That would be the main reason why I would justify going with them. But yeah, the size too, right? Because they have designed a more compact, for the amount of output that they're getting from a pair of 13-inch drivers, it is a more compact design than a lot of other ones to equal that same output. So physical size could be a justification too. Even though the Gothams are large subs, they're smaller than a lot of other subs that produce the same output.
Dan is also on board with Bo having sent back the Audio Quest cables and wires that didn't audibly improve his system at all. They do seem to be very expensive and overpriced in Dan's opinion, but he has to admit they look the part. So if someone wants cables and wires that look really nice, what do we suggest? Can we support spending more for cables that look high-end and still perform correctly? What's like our cutoff for that? I don't have a cutoff for that. Your price point that you're willing to spend on aesthetics is completely based on how much money you have and what your tolerance for wasting it is. I mean, we've suggested the SVS speaker cables before.
The SVS sound paths, yeah.
I've got in fact, when I'm plugged in right now, I think it's a monoprice. It is a flat Ethernet cable. And it's got like the fabric sheath on it.
Yep.
And it's very nice. It's not nearly as easy to like lay flat. Like once you lay it flat, it's fine. But like I keep putting it away, and putting it away is a pain in the butt because it's flat and it doesn't want to roll in certain directions. You have to keep spinning it. But it looks nice. I paid a little bit more for it. I think it was like just a little bit. And I was like, oh, I kind of like the way this looks. So I paid a little bit extra for it. Now that I have, I'm like, it's kind of a pain. I kind of wish I hadn't. I wish I had just gotten around one like a normal person. But I wanted this one because it looked nice. What is my cutoff for that? I don't have I have a cutoff for me. And that is, I am buying the world's cheapest speaker wire every single time because I just don't care.
Is it literally? Because you're perfectly fine with getting some bulk Belden speaker wire, and that might not literally be the cheapest.
Well,
it's pretty close to
it. Was when I bought it.
That's right.
I bought it from like an electrical outlet store in Portland, Oregon, and bought like 200 feet of it and then cut it to length. So yes, it was the cheapest when I got it.
So I mean, I am perfectly fine with someone spending a little bit more money for the looks that they want. For me personally, I absolutely care more about practicality, and I do care about price. I mean, I mostly want to hide the wires more than I want to see them. But there's going to be some wires that you see, and to me, if you're like, okay, I'll spend a few extra bucks to get a wire that I think looks nicer than that's just the absolute generic. When it comes to something like HDMI, I am willing to pay a little bit more. Thankfully, I don't really have to, but I'm willing to pay a little bit more for a thinner HDMI cable. Not just the least of which is handling it is a bit easier, but just to remove that gravity strain on the ports itself when you get the thinner HDMI cables, I'm willing to spend a bit more to get that. Also ones that are higher flexibility and have a better strain relief on there, because if anything's going to fail, it's where that wire goes into the plug. So I'm willing to spend a little bit extra there, not exorbitantly so, and thankfully I can get that from Monoprice, or I can get from that from Zeskit on Amazon, and the price is not much more. I could back those SoundPath cables from SVS quite easily, and they aren't the cheapest speaker wires by any means, but they're certainly not so expensive that I'm going to be like, oh, you wasted way too much money. It's like, no, they do look different from just your bog standard generic bulk speaker wire. Nice enough that if some of that is visible on your floor, you're going to be like, oh, that looks kind of cool, but they're not ridiculously expensive. So that's probably where I would recommend most. Yeah,
the Monoprice 8K whatever fiber optic cables have a nice sheath on them as well, and are really easy to manipulate, and I'm really happy with those. And those don't cost, I mean, I think they're still very cheap. So
they are still very inexpensive, but they might be like a few pennies more per foot than the absolute cheapest 8K HDMI cables that exist.
Yes. So those Macintosh amplifiers, again, they're expensive but look the part, and across the board they seem well respected, revered even in terms of performance. Well, you can put that right in your freaking bowl and eat it or whatever. So similar to Dan's JL audio question, coming at it from another direction, what justifies spending the extra money to get Macintosh amps over, say, ATI? Cachet, aesthetics.
Yep.
It's audio jewelry, I think, in many cases. There's lots of reasons. I think most people buy them simply for the cachet, and I
think for the looks. I think for the looks.
Well, yeah. So they've been told, just like we're dealing with Infinite Gary, been told for years that Macintosh amplifiers are quality amplifiers. And they have believed this so deeply that there is no amount of anybody saying that an ATI amplifier performs just as well, if not better.
Yeah.
For them to believe it. They're never going to believe that. So that cachet is not only them showing off for everybody else, which it is. That's what the blue VU meters are for.
Absolutely.
But it is also them feeling good about their purchase. So I've got no problems with that.
And yeah, those ATIs, even their signature series, their highest end, pretty plain industrial looking big black boxes with lots of holes in them to let the heat out. I'm not going to claim that ATI's amps are the prettiest looking amps, but if you want to put them in a rack and have them really reliably output their specified wattage super cleanly, then that's going to be the choice. ATI isn't the cheapest option out there. There are less expensive amplifiers than that audibly speaking, perform every bit as good. Your human ears are not going to be able to detect it, even if an audio analyzer is able to detect it on a bench somewhere. So yeah, I got no problem with someone getting a Macintosh if the money's no problem to them. If it's all about the brand name and the oohs and ahs that it gets from their friends and the looks of it, but that would be the justification, not really a performance basis reason one.
The thing about Macintosh is you don't have to know anything about audio to go, ooh, what's that?
Yeah.
Nobody looks in the ATI amp and goes, ooh, what's that? Yeah. It's a black box. I know what it is. I can see it from here. It's got a little red light on the front. Or it's blue light. I think it's red light with them. So we told Bo to save some money by going with a single Macintosh amp for each speaker rather than 2 amps for each speaker in bi-amp configuration. I do not remember that. Did we talk about that?
You mentioned it because you're like, hey, if you want to recoup some money, he has 4 monoblock Macintosh.
Oh, because he was bi-amping. That's right.
For 2 speakers. So you were like, hey, you can recoup a whole bunch of money by selling 2 of those Macintosh amplifiers.
So for real, what's the difference going to be? And along similar lines, lots of speakers provide dual binding posts for bi-amping and bi-wiring purposes. Most higher-end receivers also have the option to utilize a surround back binding post to bi-amp your front speakers too. Doesn't seem like we ever recommend doing any of that. So why are these options even there if there really isn't any difference to be had? Well, first of all, it sells things. Let's just put that out there. It costs nothing or next to nothing for them to wire things this way. And many times, especially on the cheaper speakers where there's dual binding posts back there and stuff, if you open it up, it's not really dual. It's just
the jumpers aren't only on the outside.
Yeah, they're on the inside too. So there's not. It is just audio jewelry in that case, and giving you the option of hooking up 2 amps for no apparent reason, because nobody ever puts 2 different amps going from top to bottom. It's always
we can't say
identical.
Nobody, but it's pretty much always. Yeah, one thing that really needs to be clarified for anyone who's thinking bi-amping makes sense is like in the case of these Macintosh amps, right? If you have one 250 watt Macintosh monoblock amplifier and you remove the jumpers on the back of the dual binding posts on the back of your speakers, and you plug that into what is now powering the mid-range and bass drivers, and then you take another identical 250 watt Macintosh monoblock amplifier and connect it to the upper binding posts, which are powering only the tweeter.
Yes.
You do not have 500 watts of amplification. You don't. And of course, you're thinking, well, yeah, 250 plus 250, I should, but you don't, because all that 250 watt power that is only going to the tweeter, you're using 12 of those watts, maybe, at the absolute maximum.
The rest of it just sits there doing nothing.
Doing absolutely nothing, and it doesn't get rerouted to the mid-range and bass drivers because you've removed that jumper, and you don't have a connection inside on ones that are properly wired, like those B&W speakers are. So you're saying, okay, I put the jumpers back in. I have only one of those 250 watt monoblock amplifiers. 12 of those watts are going to the tweeter. I'm down to a crushing 238 for my mid-range and bass woofers. I don't have 250 anymore. 12 of those got diverted. But that, like, what's the difference going to be? That's the difference. The amount of power that the tweeter needed to use, which is minuscule compared to what the mid-range and the woofer are using. That's why we're like, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense in an AV receiver where like I've only got 5 speakers, but I got a 7-channel AV receiver. It tells me I can repurpose the surround back binding post that I'm not using to bi-amplify my front speakers. Isn't that going to make a difference? No, it's not going to make any audible difference because you're sending like 8 watts maximum to the tweeter, and then all the other power coming from that other amplifier is going to the mid-range and the woofer drivers. Yeah, there's just no audible difference to be had. Why is it there? Because it's been there for so long that if they took it away, someone would complain. That's the main.
That is what it comes down to. AV receivers, I wrote this in an article recently that has not been published yet, are the hoarders of the AV world. They never get rid of anything. They just can't. They can't do it. So any feature that gets introduced to an AV receiver, unless it is completely reviled or ignored, and even if it's ignored, sometimes it still sticks around forever.
Yeah.
I mean, we still have speaker AB. No one has used that in forever. Or not
somebody might, and that's why it's still there.
And that's why it's still there. It just never goes away. So why do we have it? I think that there's a financial reason to keep it on there. I think speaker manufacturers like it. I think amplifier manufacturers definitely like it.
Yes,
and AV receiver manufacturers also like it because people are looking many times for a reason to spend a little bit more money.
The checkbox feature list, even if they're never going to actually use it, it's on the checkbox feature list, right?
But not only that, they're like, I've got 5 channels. I might want to. I've got a 5.1. I might want to get something else later. And I also would like the better room correction, but I can't. I don't. It's probably not going to make that much difference. Oh, but I can take those extra 2 channels and buy up my fronts.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's the tipping point. They just need enough checkboxes, like Rob said, enough checkboxes for them to go, I'll buy the next one up because it can do enough things.
And of course, there is the legitimate exception. It's rare in the whole market. You've seen it more in the professional market where you have these passive speakers. It's a 2-way speaker. There's just a tweeter and a big, 18-inch woofer or something like that. It has 2 sets of binding posts. And inside of that professional monitor speaker, there's no crossover.
Yes.
It's just a straight line connection from those binding posts to those drivers. Now, those legitimately need to be bi-amplified.
Because the amplifier itself has to be mated properly to each driver. Like you wouldn't put the same amplifier on both of them.
That's right.
Because you will see, and we talked about this before. Or
unless it's just an efficiency thing. Sometimes people have a stack of identical amplifiers, so they will be identical, but not for needs purposes. And then there's an external crossover somewhere. Very often in the mixing board, right? Like it's in the mixing board that has separate treble and bass outputs, and then those go to 2 separate amplifiers, which then feed those 2 sets of binding posts that go straight to the 2 different woofers in the driver. So I'm not going to say like there's literally no case where bi-amplifying makes sense because those setups exist. It's very rare in the home market.
In the home market, it is exceedingly rare for that to ever take place. We talked about this once before, or maybe more than once before, about how when you go to like Crown, if you go to Crown, right, Crown amps, and you look at their amp offerings, you're like, there is a stupid number of amplifiers here
that all seem
that all have the same amount of power.
That's right.
Like they all have the same amount. Like why do you need this many? You make one that has that much power, and you're done, right? Yeah. But what you realize when you click into them is like you're seeing impedance curves.
That's right.
You're seeing all these other graphs. You're like, what do these graphs mean? I don't know what any of these graphs mean. You don't, because they're not selling to you. They're selling to people who are like, this is my speaker. This is the impedance curve of my speaker. I need to match this to an amplifier that it won't explode.
Yes, because if you're wondering why you can get a 500 watt per channel amplifier from Crown for a way lower price than any home 500 watt per channel amplifier, is because there's barely any filtering inside of that Crown amplifier. It's just like straight output through the circuitry, and here's the impedance curve that I've got, and I'm not going to filter this for speakers that don't have that same impedance curve.
Yeah. And that's what it comes down to. You know, that's what it comes down to. And those speakers need to be bi-amped or tri-amped or quad-amped or however many amps they need.
That's right. However many drivers they've got, you need an amplifier for each one.
For each one.
Yes.
But that's not how this works.
I get a kick out of some of the home market speakers, like really high output capability.
Right.
And then you look around the back, but like they're like they're not built for the audiophile crowd. They're not built with looks in mind. They are built 100% for performance. And you look around back and they have one set of binding posts.
Yeah.
And sometimes people are like, what? How can this not be buy-out capable? They're like, no, don't spend your money on two 250-watt amplifiers. Get the single gigantic 500-watt amplifier. Spend your money that way. And that's the way we're going to do this.
Yes.
Like, yeah.
All right. Who do we have left, Rob?
We have on our list Kieran, and we have, sort of Max, but he and I had a bit of an email back and forth about his very specific question, but it inspired a topic that I've actually wanted to talk with Tom about on this podcast for a while. So I'm going to use that as an opportunity to talk about something I wanted to talk about and generally answer what Max and I were talking about.
I'm very curious to scroll down and see what that is, but I'm not going to until next week. All right. I want to thank our listeners in the week. I want to thank our Patreons, 133 patrons over at patreon.com. Thank you very much.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much for heading to patreon.com/AVRant podcast to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation. We got 133 financial supporters over there, and thank you all very much for that financial support.
We also want to thank Julian for talking us up on his YouTube video.
That's right. Yeah, you can check out Vibe Home Media if you'd like to. Follow along with his putting together his home theater. Use it as an opportunity when life gives you some lemons there. So thank you, Julian, for the shout out.
All right. I want to thank Greg for sending me a Fosse ZA3 amp, as well as offering to send me an Apple TV 4K, and Kurt for offering to send me an Apple TV 4K. So thank you to both of you.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Kurt.
We also got notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going from Sasi, Dan, Julian, Clinton, and Max. Thank you for thanking us.
Thank you, Sasi, Dan, Julian, Clinton, and Max. Very nice of you to send in that notes of gratitude and appreciation and encouragement. We need it these days. So thank you so much to you and to everyone who continues to listen and send in your questions.
If you want to get your question answered, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. For AVRant, I'm Tom Andry.
And I'm Rob H. Now go out and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.